This week on the Frame Savers, we travel through time and save the girl.
This is episode 79 of the Frame Savers. If you are new to us, we are streaming right now live on twitch.tv/theframesavers. Shout outs to the chat. How y'all doing? And if you are new to us, we are a retro video game podcast that focuses on speedrunning. Speedrunning is a hobby where you try to beat video games as quickly as possible using whatever tricks, glitches, and stratagems you have available to you. And this week, we're talking about a game, a little known gem called Zelda Ocarina of Time. Is that it?
That's always the go-to. That's always the go-to joke. We play a popular game and John can't pronounce it.
Yep, it's a good one. I laugh at it inside my mind every time.
A sensible chuckle.
Excited to tackle this. I can't believe we're already at episode 79. We're getting close to the triple digits, which is pretty crazy. And we've known this game was going to be a daunting task for a long time. So we've been joined by the wonderful and great, the talented ZFG. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, doing good.
Yeah, it's exciting to have him. He's going to bring all the knowledge. We are just here to, I guess, facilitate. I don't know what we're here for.
Think of us as a conduit for information.
Yeah.
We set him up and he knocks him down.
Yeah, absolutely. We're like the guy who sets up the pins, except they found robots to do that. So maybe they'll replace us with robots soon. Who knows? Before we dive into that, what have you been doing lately, bud?
It's AGDQ submission season, so that's all I'm allowed to do. We're actually recording on the day that submissions are due.
Yeah.
So
thanks for that, Chad. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
Caused no stress for my life.
I'm almost free from this hell as well. So, as soon as that's over, I'm going to resume my life of vagrancy and playing casual games.
Absolutely, that sounds great.
What about you?
I took a little bit of a break from speedrunning, but I have been derusting some Super Mario Land, so excited about that. Was thinking about submitting it, but apparently you should be good at the game and other people are, so I'm gonna sit out this one. But been enjoying that. I've got a lot of Game Boy games on the docket to be hitting up soon. And I spent 30 hours playing this game for the first time ever. Never beaten it before. I mean, I played it, but I never beaten it before. I was playing the Ocarina of Times. People seemed to enjoy watching me play it. They yelled at me that I didn't understand anything for about 30 hours, and then it was over. So
I really enjoyed watching you play Jabu Jabu.
That was a good one.
Because remember the part at the beginning of Jabu Jabu?
Yes, I remember it.
Where you didn't know what a door was? Like, you didn't know which was the door, and so you walked around in the first room for...
Okay, so first of all, somehow I hit the door with the sword and opened it at the same time, the first one. And so I was like, oh, these doors need to be attacked to open. And I just never thought to press A. So that was 45 minutes of my time just kind of wandering around, figuring out what doors were, and it was a really good time. I enjoyed it.
But outside of that, you finished the game real quick. It was just that 45 minutes.
Yeah, I beated the game. It was a lot of fun. I've got a lot of thoughts. I've got a lot of feelings about it. But before we dive into this game, let's just give some plugs for some cool events coming up. One of them that we are both participating in, Big Bad Gameathon 2018. Who would have thought that me and you would be in a bad game marathon? It's a pretty big shock. Vegas odds were low, but that's going to be September 14th to the 16th on twitch.tv/Big Bad Gameathon. I think you're doing 3 games?
Yeah, 2 bad games and 1 bad game exhibition, because it's so bad I can't even beat it. So
yeah, that's always good. It's always good to... That's the only place you could really show off a game that you literally cannot even complete.
Right.
I'll be
I
doing
told them
a race.
I'll play it for 30 minutes, and that's it.
I'll be doing a race of Barbie Game Girl on the Game Boy with Sharif, and you're going to be doing a Pugsy race.
No, I'm commentating Pugsy, but I'm
Okay.
doing a run of Flynn and Freckles, which is that PS4 game I was playing, and I'm playing Garfield's Scary Scavenger Hunt 2.
Good life decision.
A known treasure, and then a really terrible Unity game from Steam, but that one I'm only playing for 30 minutes.
To be fair, once he got through his first scavenger hunt, he was way more talented. He was much better at it, and it's just a way better experience as a game, I would say. We also have Speedrun Showcase 2018 Fall Edition, which is live from Next Level Video Games in Blackwood, New Jersey, and you can find that on twitch.tv/NL Video Games. So definitely check those events coming up. We're excited about those. But Chad, why are we talking about this little-known game, Ocarina of Time?
So when we started this podcast, we made a lot of effort to try not to knock out all the big ones right away. We had the same conversation when we did Super Mario 64. We said we didn't want to start off like doing all of the major games right out the gate. We had to save some good ones for later. And I think the more that we did episodes, the more we realized how hard a game of this scale was going to be. So I think ultimately it's for the best that we waited so long to do Ocarina of Time, because I now feel like I'm capable of doing an episode on this game. God help us if we had done this like episode 10.
Yeah. So we used to be bad at this, and now we're marginally less bad at this. So I feel more prepared than normal to do a big game. Hopefully we can give it the credence it deserves. It's had a huge impact on the speedrun community, especially, even outside of the fact that this is a lot of people's favorite video game of all time. This is a lot of people's game they go back to, even if they're not regular retro gamers. On top of that, it's been one of probably the top 3 to 5 most impactful speedruns in the speedrunning community over time. And so it's got a lot of cool speedrun history to it as well, which we'll be going through. And that just kind of adds to the weight of an episode like this. So I'm excited to do it. I was willing to go ahead, take 30 hours out of my life and beat the game. So I did no research outside that. So I'm just going to talk about how I feel about the game. Chad's going to teach us all the things.
What's your history of it, ZFG? What like, I mean, did you grow up with this game? I don't know how old you are.
Yeah,
I peg you somewhere between 16 and 40. So
yeah, I did grow up with this game. I got it for my 7th birthday.
Nice.
And so I always loved it as a kid. And I played for a few years just casually, just always trying to get it to 100%, like over a few years. Never quite got it to 100% when I was a kid. But I always liked looking up glitches in all my favorite games. So like a handful of years later, 2005, 2006 or so, I just like looking up glitches, and I look up some Ocarina of Time glitches, think, oh, hey, this is my favorite game. Glitches in this game are cool. That's cool. And then later on, I find out that people, use glitches to go fast in speedruns, and I'm like, oh, this is really cool, because I thought glitches were really cool, but they were just kind of fun things to mess around with, and then speedrunning was like a way to make use of these glitches, like to give them a purpose. And so I thought it was really cool and got into speedrunning it.
So a lot of people start off with speedrunning and then kind of find a game that fits, but yours was sort of backwards to that. You already knew you liked this game, and speedrunning was just sort of an extra thing to add on to it.
Yeah.
So when you were 7, did it take you like 4.5 hours to 100% it, or?
Not quite. I think I remember it taking me like a day to find the Kakiri sword, and then another day to learn I could save the game.
I miss those days where you were just like wander around and you would like find like a bag of beans and you'd be like, well, I made progress. And it was like 4 hours of you playing. And in the meantime, you just cut all the grass everywhere.
I remember I had the same thing with Super Mario 64. Like I would just sit around in levels doing nothing all day. But like I look back at that fondly. I remember loving just sitting around in levels, like wandering around doing nothing. You could totally do that with Ocarina of Time. I probably did that with Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, I remember doing that a lot too.
I wish I could enjoy video games now. I used to be able to enjoy them without even playing them back then, and now you can't even enjoy them playing them, right? So, no, I like video games a lot, but I do have fond memories of being able to just casually live in a world, basically, and
miss the days of casual video gaming.
Build a house and just pretend that you were doing things that don't have anything to do with the game. And there was a lot of good times. Burn all the bushes in all the Zelda games.
I live in your house now.
Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and read a quick ad, and then we're going to move to break. So just so you know, the Frame Savers is sponsored by the Electric Underground podcast. The Electric Underground podcast is a show dedicated to the beautiful genre of shmups, which we don't get to talk about too often on the podcast because, you know, it's definitely more of a 1cc community than a speedrun community, although there are a lot of really awesome shmup speedruns. And this podcast is an effort to bring the community closer together, as well as to help introduce new players to these fantastic games. The show covers a wide variety of accessible topics that the average gamer can enjoy. So you won't be tuning into long discussions of intricate scoring mechanics. Now, more than ever, is a great time to get into the genre, and all new players are welcome in the podcast Discord. It's a super chill crowd. To find the Electric Underground podcast, just Google Shmup Podcast, and the show will be right there waiting for you. And I think it has a spaceship or something. Also, I believe they're doing an episode about speedrunning or something speedrunning adjacent coming up soon. So it's definitely something I recommend you go check out.
I'm just reading this cold read for the first time, and when it says long discussions of intricate mechanics, I feel personally attacked.
Yeah, I do too. Also, that was the first time I read it, so I think I did okay, right? So
I loved it.
So let's go ahead and take a quick break, listen to some of this great Ocarina of Time music, and then we're going to learn about the game.
So, I mean, everyone kind of knows what Ocarina of Time is. If you're not really familiar with Ocarina of Time, it's the fifth game in the Zelda franchise, and it was the first one that hit the third dimension. But whereas typically on these episodes we'd probably go into great detail about what is the genre of the game, what are the mechanics, you know, how many levels are there, what do you see throughout the game. I don't think that that's necessary for this. I feel like Zelda is such a pivotal franchise that a lot of people are pretty familiar with that. So running through that's not completely necessary. As far as
and we got a lot of stuff to talk about too. There's too much cool stuff to talk about to just tell you, oh, you start out in the village and
it's
then
an
you go
action
to the
adventure and all of that stuff. So the story is by Kensuke Tanabe, who is also the writer for A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening. And the basic premise for this story is that you are a young Hylian boy named Link who defends both Hyrule and the Triforce from the evil Gerudo King Ganondorf. And using the power of the Ocarina of Time, Link can travel back and forth through time to awaken the Seven Sages to imprison Ganondorf in the Sacred Realm. So that's basically the high-level story. And really all the games in the Zelda franchise do sort of an interesting job of twisting the same premise. It's always Ganon, it's always Zelda, it's always Link, but still manages to be a slightly different game every single time.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the first 5 Zelda games, right? We've got Zelda 1, which is a top-down adventure, right? Invented the genre. Then Zelda 2 goes a completely different direction. The story is actually fairly different if you go into it. Like, Ganon's actually dead, and completely different gameplay. Then the third one, Link to the Past, probably the best Zelda game out there. And then my favorite Zelda game, Link's Awakening, after that, where you're on Koholint Island, and it's like a whole different cast of characters and a whole different thing. Like, they did a really good job of mixing up kind of the story and gameplay in these early ones, which kind of is funny because I think later on they've kind of, I guess, gotten a bit more static. I don't know. Twilight Princess is fairly different. Wind Waker's pretty different. So
was Link's Awakening, was the fact that Link's Awakening was supposed to be sort of a dream, was that a twist ending or not? Because
it was. Yeah.
Okay.
So you wake up the Windfish, and the Windfish is like, oh, everything here is going to be destroyed, and it's very depressing and melancholic.
Oh, dang. Because I was thinking Ocarina of Time was the first Zelda game with a twist. Because there's a character, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a character in the game whose identity turns out to be a twist at the end. But I guess Link's Awakening did it first. So sorry, Ocarina of Time.
Who's the fish girl? Was it her?
Rudo?
Don't like her. Not a big fan.
No, we're not talking about Rudo.
Okay, let's not do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, Link's Awakening came out in '93, A Link to the Past in '91, and then there was a big break, you know, in between 91, 93 to 1998 when Ocarina of Time came out. So this is 5 years of waiting for Zelda game. We wouldn't know anything about what that's like, would we?
Yeah. Nowadays, you only get one Zelda per console, and that's the way we like it.
Yeah. So, you
But
know,
there was a lot of
I think,
anticipation. I mean,
yeah.
and you can
I
kind
think,
of see that in the sales as well. Like, Link to the Past sold 4.6 million copies. Link's Awakening sold 3.8 million copies, with another like handful of millions when the deluxe version released later for the Game Boy Color. But Ocarina of Time sold 7.6 million copies, and over 500,000 of those pre-orders were placed as pre-orders, which was more than triple of any other game that had ever been released. And even then, 1 million of those copies were sold in just the first week, and I think something like 2.5 million had been sold before the end of 1998, which there was only like
wow,
a month left of 1998 when the game released. So
holiday season.
this was a huge drop.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a sign of what modern gaming has become, right? Where games get a lot more heavily pre-ordered, and those numbers are really significant, and people anticipate a game for a long period of time. I think it's to Nintendo's credit that they tend to take their time to make sure they develop the game and make it properly good, as opposed to rushing out releases. I think a lot of us got frustrated that Breath of the Wild took so long to come out. I'm sure a lot of people bought Wii U's for Breath of the Wild. It never came out, you know, until the Switch was out. But they did such an amazing job, and so Ocarina of Time, like, you know, you wait 5 years, but at least you got Ocarina of Time, right? You didn't get some rushed product, and I think Nintendo's always been good about that.
It just occurred to me that the reason why I've always had access to video games when they first come out is because my birthday is during the holiday season. It just now entered my head that when ZFG said that he got the game for his birthday, that may not have been right when the game came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was actually 3 years after it came out, so I actually did not play it right away.
Oh, okay.
It's probably a big sign, though, also just of the depth of the N64 library. I think, you know, there was a lot of different games you could get for Super Nintendo and the Game Boy to play, but like N64 only had a couple of really hot titles, right? So if you had an N64, you were going to get Mario 64, you were going to get Ocarina of Time, right? So,
That's actually a really good point. I mean, the N64 library was, I mean, at least by my assessment, very weak. There's a lot of licensed titles that are pretty good, and that's not to discredit the individual games. Some of the games on the N64 are some of the best games, but overall the library is fairly weak. So you're right.
It's a very top-heavy library.
Yeah, if you were an N64 owner, you could pretty much guarantee you owned one of, you know, 6 to 8 games.
I assume you mean first-party games, not licensed games.
No, I'm talking about like tie-ins with movies and things like that, like really weak titles that were just like you know, the Toy Story game or the
yeah, absolutely. And the N64 is still a very hugely like played console for casual retro gamers. Like, I have plenty of friends who aren't into retro gaming, that aren't even into gaming, and they'll have, you know, an N64 with Mario Kart, GoldenEye, and you know, SM64, Ocarina of Time, like still to this day. And those are like, they'll just have people over and play Mario Kart. So top heavy system for sure, makes sense why it sold so well. Development for this game actually began around the same time as Super Mario 64, and initially used the same engine as Super Mario 64, but it required significant changes to be made. That would be really interesting to see what this game would look like with a similar engine in Super Mario 64. But the most notable thing is that the camera was changed. So in SM64, the player could control the camera, but in Ocarina of Time, the camera kind of emphasized the game's world. So it kind of presented to you what you were supposed to see instead.
Right. Yeah, and I think that translates well in the gameplay as well. Like with Mario, you can kind of look around you as you're moving around, but you really have to make a concerted effort to move Link to get a good vantage of the world around you. That, I think that's one of the reasons why there's such a inclination to just see up, so that you, like, hitting the see up button allows you to go into first person view, and doing that kind of gives you that ability. So this game was first shown at Nintendo Space World in December of 1995. That was the early introduction to that. And at the time, Ocarina of Time was anticipated to be released for the 64 disk drive, which was a peripheral that ultimately ended up being canned and didn't ever really see the light of day. There were a number of games that were intended to be released for the 64 disk drive we've talked about in the past. Games like spiritual successors to Mario Paint, there was Star Fox, there was a whole bunch of different things, but this was originally intended to be for the 64 disk drive, but they found out that there was limitations to the disk-based hardware that prevented the game from running smoothly, and so they migrated back to the cartridge version. And so one of the reasons why we ended up with Master Quest is because they ended up deciding that they were going to ultimately do a disk drive expansion for this game, tentatively known as Euro Zelda, which loosely translates as like reverse Zelda, sort of. Think of it in terms of like if you're talking about a record, the reverse side of the record, the B side of the record, or something like that. That's what Euro Zelda is referring to, is like the reverse side of the game. And it was supposed to have contained rearranged versions of the dungeon from the original game, and so all of that got scrapped when the disk drive version got scrapped ended up getting folded into the development of Master Quest.
Two quick thoughts. First of all, Nintendo Space World sounds amazing. I want to go there. I don't know what that is, but I want to attend whatever Nintendo Space World is. Secondly, yeah, if you're interested in the 64 disk drive, I don't think me or Chad really have like a huge depth of knowledge on it, but there's a bunch of cool stuff on YouTube about it, especially because Metal Jesus Rocks, who's a really big retro YouTuber, found a US edition of the disk drive, like a prototype, where he was, which was the first time that was ever found. So he got a bunch of people to dive into that and look into it. So there's been some recent discoveries within the past 2 years about the 64 disk drive that are worth looking into on YouTube or Googling that, you know, we don't really have the time to talk about now. But this was actually the largest Nintendo game developed at the time, 32 megabytes of storage, which I'm pretty sure my computer doesn't even have right now. I mean, that's an unbelievable amount of storage, right?
Yeah, you could open up a text file and hit your face against it for a few minutes, and you'd have a bigger file than Ocarina of Time.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, I guess I don't understand the computer sciences, but biggest Nintendo game at the time, and it considered using Super Mario 64's trick of restricting Link to Ganon's castle, kind of like in SM64 where you're in Peach's castle and you jump into the different paintings, and traveling to other regions using paintings as well. Then this was the inspiration for the Phantom Ganon fight in the Forest Temple, also known as the worst temple in the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting, like looking at things through that lens and realizing that the Phantom Ganon fight probably borrowed a lot from that concept of going in and out of paintings. So kind of a neat idea. So Miyamoto envisioned a cinematic style for this game. In a lot of cases, he envisioned it similar to the Chanbara style of samurai films. But he ultimately wanted the game to have a distinctly video game oriented style. And so what he ended up doing was, rather than what was actually possible, he could have done, they could have designed a lot of the cutscenes as full motion video cutscenes. They were not pre-rendered, instead used the real-time computing to generate the cutscenes in a style that really didn't separate the gameplay from the cutscene. It was very visually similar, and so it didn't really pull you out of the game. Like if you've ever played, you know, Final Fantasy VII, and there's this very distinct jump. I
was about to bring up that exact thing. Exactly. Same time this came out. And kind of the way video games have gone, you know, cinematics is a big part of video games now. We do a lot of storytelling in our video games, and this is kind of the period of time where that was becoming possible. And so it's interesting that, you know, Nintendo decided, no, let's keep you in that world. We're going to keep all the graphics the same. This is going to render just the same way as if you were, you know, platforming around or using your hookshot or looking around this area. Whereas Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation went the complete opposite, where it, you know, there's 5 different art styles in that game. Some of them are full motion video, some of them are pre-rendered, some of them are this and that. And so I think this was the right call for sure. I think, you know, it ages better in the fact that, you know, not having the full capability of making that work at that time makes for something that doesn't age very well in Final Fantasy VII. Yeah,
and the game ultimately includes more than 90 minutes of cinematics, so that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
I'm sure
that's a lot for back then.
I'm sure anyone who has speedrun a glitchless version of this game, glitchless category, who can't just skip the cutscenes, is probably keenly aware of how long the cutscenes are in this game.
Absolutely.
So this game did have a few re-releases as well. So there was
the Master Quest version is actually pretty collectible, I believe, on the GameCube. Not too expensive.
Yeah.
But, and it was a pre-order bonus for the Wind Waker in 2002, 2003. So this is 4 or 5 years later, and it contains the original N64 game as well as Master Quest. And every dungeon is modified to increase the difficulty of the game, similar to, you know, Zelda's been doing this since Zelda 1 with Second Quest. So it's really cool that I guess they've always wanted to give replay value in that way. and it received praise as a treat for fans of Ocarina of Time. Maybe kind of compensating again for not releasing content as often as other series, right? Mario usually has new games every year or two, and so
I think some critics were frustrated that it or thought that it would frustrate players, but in general, I think they said that the new changes to the game weren't just necessarily tacked on. It did change the gameplay somewhat, so items in the past that may not have been mandatory suddenly became mandatory. Items in the past that may have been mandatory became optional. And so it did rearrange the game in an appropriate way to add on extra playability.
Yeah, and then this also released on the 3DS, which is pretty cool. They released this and Majora's Mask in 3D and did add 3D features. So if you turn on the 3D on your 3DS, they actually did a really good job of adding something to the game. Most of those games on the 3DS I don't like playing in 3D, but I've played this a little bit in 3D, and it actually adds a depth of play that otherwise wouldn't be there. So a lot of people's eyes can't handle that for too long, but it's pretty neat. This was in 2011, and then the eShop in 2012 also came out with Majora's Mask after it. Came out with like a Majora's Mask special edition 3DS, and a lot of people got to play the two N64 Zeldas that they maybe never got to play otherwise. So similar to what we've talked about on the GBA, where a lot of people played the Super Nintendo games and Nintendo games for the first time on the GBA. I think a lot of people got opportunities to play some of these early 3D games on the 3DS because of releases like this.
So this was actually produced by Nintendo with assistance from Grezzo, a private company who went on to help with Majora's Mask 3D and Triforce Heroes. And I think what makes this one really unique is that it's pretty much a full redesign graphically.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Nintendo's re-releases of games have been less than stellar. All Stars was a graphical update over the NES games, but in general, Nintendo has done a really good job of putting a higher price tag on an older product for a newer console. Mm-hmm. And so this, I think, is a much more tasteful version of that, where they fully redesigned it graphically, built from the ground up. It includes its own Master Quest, which, in addition to also redesigned dungeon, actually mirrors the entire game, which I've always found that to be a surprisingly challenging addition. Like when you're
Mm-hmm.
playing a Mario Kart game or something and you go into mirror mode and now the entire track is reversed left to right and you think, well, that shouldn't be that hard. And it is that hard.
Yeah. It's first of all, Grezzo sounds like an evil company from an 80s movie. I just want to throw that out.
I think
a lot of speedrunners would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think the company was formed by the lead developer for the Mana series.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but these were cool re-releases. Whether or not you like them as much as the original, of course, it's awesome to get these in the hands of people on a modern console, and they did do a decent bit of work updating the graphics to make it a little bit more palatable for the modern sensibilities. And overall, I enjoyed fooling around with it for a bit. Again, I didn't really play much of the game until recently, but yeah, it's been re-released a few times. So if you have a GameCube, or if you have a 3DS, or if you have an N64, you can go and play this. And I'm sure it's in a bunch of virtual consoles as well. I'm sure they've released it anytime they could, because Nintendo likes to, make money. Makes sense.
Yeah, it's been released quite a few times.
And I'm sure they've never complained.
Only like 8 times.
Yeah. So any last thoughts kind of just about the story, the history of Ocarina of Time before we take a break and kind of review it as a game?
Not really.
Yeah, this game has some interesting connections to the lore. I think that they did an interesting job of tying in pieces of Zelda lore into the game. For instance, all the sages are named after dungeons, or all the sages in this game, Ocarina of Time, are named after towns in Zelda 2, which I always thought was sort of an interesting twist. Just different ways to tie in pieces that are familiar to people who have actually kept up with Zelda up till this point. So I think that Zelda does a really nice job of that, even going forward. You always have these characters that you see reappear, even though it's supposed to be a completely different world at a completely different time with a completely different cast of characters. You'll have like the same names popping up over and over. I think it's really interesting when you see that.
Even in Breath of the Wild, they have like there's like a million different area names in Breath of the Wild, and they have like all these names of like really obscure characters from old Zelda games, and they just pop up as a name of a certain area.
Right.
Pretty cool.
Little fan service, a little
Yeah.
blast of the past. That's always fun to see. Well, let's go ahead. Let's listen to some fresh Ocarina of Time music and then do our standard reviews and have ZFG get mad at me.
So, despite the immense difficulty talking about a game that's probably this pivotal, at least for me, I know John's chomping at the bit to let us know his opinions about Ocarina of Time. We still want to sort of run through our typical ratings, so at the very end we will give final comments and a score, but in general what we want to talk about is graphics, music and sound, controls and gameplay, difficulty and fairness, fun and replayability. And those will sort of culminate in our overall opinion about the game, for which I think the three of us will differ greatly.
My rating's not that bad, okay?
Yeah,
don't be that worried.
I'm ready for the 0.5.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the graphics, I mean, it's really tough. We've talked about this before in a bunch of games we've done around this era. Anything early to mid PlayStation 1 and 64 hasn't aged particularly well, no matter how well it was done at the time. But for the time, these were amazing graphics, and it was really cool to see the whole Zelda world fleshed out in 3D, right? This is the 5th game, so there's a lot of common enemies you're used to seeing, Octoroks and Lionels and all these different things, but seeing them in 3D, you get a whole new look at them. There's, I think, a lot of stuff was introduced as well. Were the Gerudos kind of introduced through this?
Yeah, I don't think that.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't think the Gerudo appeared in a previous game.
Yeah, you got the people from Kokiri. You've got a lot of different, you know, I guess not cultures, but you've got like the people from the main town, and then all these different areas. You can go to the Lulu farm or whatever it is. So it's a really, really cool world to explore, especially at this time. It feels small now, going back and playing it in 2018. But I remember going into Hyrule Field, and you're just like, wow, there's this whole world open up to me. I can go wherever I want, and it just felt more like there's more explorative potential than in even the other Zelda games. I mean, I think Zelda's always been an exploration-based action-adventure game, but the exploration really feels ramped up in this game in the similar way that Breath of the Wild feels ramped up today, where, you know, that's a huge game to us, but back then that was the same feel that I think most of us got as kids going into this game. So I never really had an issue with the graphics back then. I mean,
yeah, all of my research, everyone kept talking about how the graphics didn't age well, but I haven't found that to be the case. I mean, perhaps it's heavily nostalgia-based for me. I mean, and it's impossible to remove that sort of bias, but I still remember, you know, the first time walking out into Hyrule Field and just seeing that huge expanse of land and seeing the castle way off in the distance and Death Mountain off to your right, and it's just such a iconic moment. It's hard to look at that and say, oh yeah, but you know, there's not enough polygons. I think ultimately there's a lot of challenges with your first jump into 3D. You take a lot of characters and enemies and things like that, and you want to make their likenesses familiar, but ultimately you won't get it right the first try. And I think if you look at it through that lens, I think that this game really holds up exceptionally well for its era, for its age.
Yeah, I think especially like compared to any other N64 game, this looks like significantly better than most other N64 games.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely aged a lot better than a Mario Kart 64, Super Mario 64, or like a GoldenEye.
Yeah.
It's polygonal, but in a way that's still kind of charming and still shows the character sprites in a objectively, like, aesthetically pleasing way. So I think it's as good as you can expect from an N64 game in 2018. It was the graphics were pretty solid. Also, the bosses are really large, which is pretty cool. You know, Ganon's like this huge towering figure that you fight at the end. That kind of stuff isn't maybe something that you were used to at that time, especially in 3D. You know, I think Link to the Past did a really good job of making the bosses very large and larger than life, and this translated really well to 3D. So I think they did a great job personally. In terms of music, I mean, this soundtrack is bumping. It came with the soundtrack. At least my copy did. I wish I still had it somewhere, but I had a CD of Ocarina of Time music back in 1997, 1998. And I mean, it's really well orchestrated, awesome music. Koji Kondo, our dude, he knows how to write a tune, I feel like. And, you know, the music's critical to the plot because it's Ocarina of Time. So it's like you have to learn different songs to do different things. That's like your abilities in Mega Man. This is your songs in Ocarina of Time. And all the songs have different uses in the gameplay and in the game and set mood. I think the soundtrack's just stellar.
Yeah. This was actually the last game where Koji Kondo worked alone on composition. And the only other note I have about music is that there was actually a change made to the music after the first version. The Fire Temple music had to be changed after the release due to Nintendo of America's policy regarding religious references in games.
Oh, yeah.
Because the Fire Temple had that, the chanting in the background.
I think my version has that, actually, because I think it's in earlier versions.
Yeah.
My chat was talking about
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
If you have an early enough copy of the game, you'll have it, and it got removed. Also, Koji Kondo, who we've talked about before on this podcast, said it was a limitation or a struggle to limit the songs to 5 notes for the Ocarina. So that's pretty cool that they were able to pull that off. I think there's 8 songs in the game that you can learn on Ocarina.
12.
12. Wow. So, and all of them are integral, not just to the gameplay, but also to the plot and the feeling and setting of the dungeons. I don't know to talk about this in gameplay or graphics, but all the dungeons have very unique feels to them as well, which goes along with the music and the Ocarina of tunes and just the settings. You know, you get your kind of first real horror feeling dungeon with the Shadow Temple in this. You got the Water Temple, which is very unique. So I guess we can move over to gameplay, but I feel like they did a really good job of tying those together and fleshing out different worlds. You know, I think Zelda had tried to do kind of like horror spooky based levels in the past. Like, I mean, you got Skullwoods and Link to the Past. You got Misery Mire. You have the Wiz Robes, which are like ghosts and stuff like that. But this game really kind of took a darker turn graphically, musically, and gameplay wise in some of these dungeons, which was really cool to see. You know, that's kind of foreshadowing of like Twilight Princess, which is a really dark, and Majora's Mask. They were really dark Zelda games. So Zelda was kind of taking a little bit more of an edgier, less kid-friendly approach to some of their ideas, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, the point the video's at right now, and also someone in the chat just mentioned it, I remember the first time that I ever came up against a Redead in this game. And that scream is just so visceral.
Oh, it's terrible.
Right at that moment, like as a kid, that was terrifying to me. Like
for sure.
Even though I knew how to deal with them, like don't let them face you, and then it's not a problem. Like I was just too scared to proceed. So I mean, I think that this game did a great job with sound design, both for the music, which is obviously one of, I think a lot of people praise this soundtrack as being one of the best soundtracks in the franchise, but on top of that, I think that just the overall sound design's fantastic. If you can forgive Link constantly screaming every time you swing your sword or roll, I think in general it's great sound design.
You're missing the most annoying sound,
which is
Navi. Cliche, but we have to talk about Navi yelling at you the whole time. Can't kill Navi, unfortunately.
Do you hear it in your sleep, ZFG? I've just got to know that.
No, you get so used to it, it doesn't affect you anymore after speedrunning it.
If you're like dating and a girl like yells at you like, "Hey, listen," like, is it just like you
automatically tune
exactly. It out anyway, so too?
Exactly, you tune it out, yeah.
Yeah, that could be frustrating.
Just like usual.
Yeah,
just get flashbacks.
Moving, I guess moving into the gameplay, I would say I think this game has the best designed dungeons of any Zelda game I've played. Now, I've only beaten Zelda 1, Zelda 3 and 4, and this, and most of Breath of the Wild. So I haven't played a lot of the 3D Zeldas. I've only played this and Breath of the Wild. But the dungeon design was really good. I was expecting it to be a bit poor. I know a lot of people complain about the Water Temple, and I think that's because that's an obvious place to get stuck as a kid because it's a difficult puzzle. But as an adult playing it in 2018, I thought it was a very innovative and creative dungeon. And I felt like all the dungeons outside of Jabu Jabu and Forest Temple were really well designed and enjoyable for sure, and all had their own different twists, their own different things, just like your Zelda universe, where different items made that dungeon work in a certain way, and that was really awesome.
Yeah, personally, I really like pretty much all the dungeons. I don't really like the child dungeons that much, but all the adult dungeons I think are really good.
Yeah.
Actually, my favorite overall Zelda dungeon though is actually the Stone Tower Temple in Majora's Mask.
Okay.
But other than that, like, yeah, I really like the OT dungeons as pretty much in the entire series, like my favorites.
Yeah, they're really well designed, and I feel like they started to implement some really solid puzzles. Like even if you look back at Link to the Past, I don't know if I'm a bit shrouded by how much me and Chad have both speedrun that game. But like the puzzle element's not too much there. In Link's Awakening, it really did step up its puzzle element for the dungeons. And this game did that a lot the same. I think it lacks a lot in combat, which Zelda 1, Zelda 2, Zelda 3, and Link's Awakening all were a little bit stronger at probably because they were moving to the 3D. But in terms of the gameplay in regards to just dungeon and puzzle design, I actually found it to be an incredibly well designed game for sure, and I thought that was a surprise to me, I guess, even in 2018, finding it impressive.
Yeah,
I definitely enjoy these more than the Breath of the Wild dungeons, for example. So
I think one of the things that made the gameplay nicer in this game is that, and this would probably be perceived as a negative typically, but I view it as a positive, perhaps just for nostalgia. But I think the fact that this game doesn't necessarily always hold your hand about where you're supposed to be going all the time, and kind of leaves it up to you to explore, you know, like a real adventure. When we talked about A Link to the Past, we talked about how it's kind of nice that you don't get stuck for too long because the game puts on your map, okay, here's where Dungeon 1 is, here's where Dungeon 2 is. But I think in a lot of ways, sort of making the world feel like a real world, like the real world isn't just going to hand you a map saying, here's where all the bad guys live. You know, you actually have to hunt it down.
maybe not you.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't trust you to take care of it. I get those maps all the time. No, I mean, it does a good balance of that because you can talk to, who's the little girl from Kokiri Village? Sarah?
Oh,
Saria.
Saria. Yeah. So you can like talk to her and she'll give you hints as to where to go, and Navi will give you hints as to where to go sometimes. So it doesn't completely put you in the stuck situation where it's like, well, you better just find the right place. Like you can get clues and things to hit you in the right direction, but it doesn't hold your hand in the same way that, you know, like you said, Link to the Past did, which I think is really good. And you know, I think outside of the gameplay for the level design and the world design, I think the combat is something we definitely should talk about, which kind of combines with controls and gameplay. But in general, even outside of any controls, the combat is fairly shallow, right? I mean, there's not a lot to the combat that you can do. There's not as many kind of attack-based weapons you're really going to consistently be using like you would in Link's Awakening or Link to the Past. And, you know, the bosses can be, you know, fairly less... I don't know. I guess do you know what I'm saying? I feel like that the items you use, you're generally using the hook shot and the sword, and that's about all you're using unless you're using something to solve a puzzle. You're not using Din's Fire to attack things. You're not using different arrows very often or different magics. You're kind of just, you know, the main item is the ocarina and how that works with the gameplay unfolding.
Yeah, so there's just as much in Ocarina of Time as there is in A Link to the Past, but I think you nailed exactly what the issue is that and I've given this a lot of thought. It has a lot more to do, I think, with the transition to 3 dimensions. You know, in 2 dimensions, if you're in a room crowded with enemies, I mean, you have to figure out a way to navigate around them. The addition of the 3rd dimension really makes the space feel a lot more sparse. And so, you know,
and there's big rooms and big levels. You're not getting crowded by enemies.
So I mean, if you've got bats in the room and 2 enemies, like, it is a perfectly reasonable option to just walk around them versus fighting them. As I mean, I'm sure I did plenty as a kid. And I think that's one of the reasons why it feels like the combat's a lot more shallow, is because rather than in some previous Zelda games where you had one choice and that was to engage, you now have the choice to engage or just laughably ignore a lot of opponents or enemies. So I think that's where the shallowness comes from, because I don't think that there's anything different about Ocarina of Time versus, we keep going back to A Link to the Past as the most recent major title right before this. You have all the same types of weapons. As far as Link's sword tech, he does the exact same things. He can swing it, he can spin with it. They even added a jump slash, which is really useful. So he even had more sword tech than he had before. But a lot of times your option is just like, I would rather not engage this enemy, so I will leave.
Yeah, maybe it's partly adding the additional sword tech, so you can poke, you can slash, you can jump and slash, and so that kind of provides a couple of different options in situations that maybe in the past you'd want to pull out the fire rod or the Kena Samaria or something like that. And also, Zelda 2 kind of had the same issue, right? You're mostly just using your sword in Zelda 2. You're not using different items, whatever. But with Link's Awakening and Link to the Past, it was very heavy on different items for combat. And a lot of the items in this game are much more intended to progress the plot, which is interesting, but ultimately I feel like makes the combat a bit stale and repetitive, especially over
the items are
20,
puzzle
30
solving.
hour casual experience.
They're puzzle solving artifacts versus being weapons
Combat
that you would
based,
actually use
absolutely.
typically.
In terms of fun and replayability, if we should move on from the gameplay, unless you have anything else that you wanted to add. This game has a lot of stuff in it, but not like a ton of side quests or anything. I mean, this is early in this kind of adventure game. You can't expect the amount of side quests you would get, even 10 years later. But there's enough little stuff to do on the side. You can get all the gold sculptulas. There's mini games. There's small little side quests that you can do to get extra hearts and extra stuff. 100%ing Zelda games is kind of ingrained in anybody who loves Zelda. You want to find all the different heart pieces, all the items. So there's definitely a lot more replayability in this than most games, but probably not much more than was in Link to the Past. There wasn't like a ton of different stuff you could go do other than the actual main plot, right?
Right.
I think there's actually like there's quite a bit of stuff, like with all the hearts, gold sculptulas, and upgrades and stuff.
Which is I'd say there's past. I mean, just like there's all these items you can go get to 100% it, but there's not like, oh, here's a bunch of side quests that go on, or that didn't really get into games.
I think there's a little bit more, but not like a significant amount.
I think Majora's Mask did the best job of like creating the side quest universe. Which we didn't really touch on all that much in our breakdown, because that's a game that deserves more than just to be a bullet point on the Ocarina of Time episode.
Absolutely.
But Majora's Mask built on more or less the same engine as Ocarina of Time, but really added a much more expansive universe that felt real and it surrounded you. And I think while this game features a lot of like trade quests and you do have to interact with people, and there's little side things that you can do, little things that you can do to uncover heart pieces or gold sculptula tokens.
Get Epona or get the different masks and all that stuff,
I think that Majora's Mask really fleshed out that idea that, wow, our world feels like a real world if we create more of that kind of stuff.
Just if you compare this to, and it's not really a fair comparison because it's an RPG, but we're talking about Final Fantasy VII coming out around the same time. Think about all the side quests, all the different stuff they were able to pack in because it was disc-based, really. And I think the cartridge kind of limits the amount of stuff they were able to add that would have been outside of the scope of the dungeons and stuff. But I mean, it's not really a fair criticism, but it's definitely something I think adds to less replayability. But you also have the master quest that you can do. You also can approach this game from a number of different perspectives, especially once you start learning glitches. Even if you're not looking to speedrun the game, you can challenge yourself in a lot of ways by doing the dungeons in different orders. You can do child dungeons as adults. You can do a lot of cool different things that probably wouldn't be intended in replayability for a casual player, but maybe someone like ZFG, who even before he speedran the game was poking around trying to learn this different cool stuff that allowed him to replay his game, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this game does give you a lot of flexibility. This was the first Zelda I ever did a 3-heart challenge in. I did that when I was in high school or college or something like that, and you know, I was always bummed that A Link to the Past wouldn't let you do that. You can't get the medallion for the dungeon, you can't get the pendant or the crystal for the dungeon until you collect the heart piece. Ocarina of Time just doesn't care. I would just skip them.
Yeah. Zelda 1 didn't care either. I don't know
didn't.
why they required that in Link to the Past, but they did. So.
Yeah.
One thing I want to say for final comments before we move on is best song is Gerudo's song, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of
hot
anything better.
acoustic guitar just popping in there.
Yeah.
Just like,
Yeah. The only one that really comes close is Song of Storms.
that's a good one too.
That is a good song.
Funny note, I'll just say, like, my experience, I definitely struggled a lot with the controls. I guess we didn't talk that much about controls, I just realized, but the controls for me were very frustrating. They were frustrating for me in 1997. They're frustrating for me in 2018. I don't like the Z targeting. I get that it was pretty ingenious and kind of the only way they could do things, and I think it works for sure, but it's just not something I enjoy controlling. I did feel like I was fighting the camera.
So you used switch mode for Z targeting, which is notoriously frustrating because if you
I switched it halfway once you told me.
Yeah, because if you have two enemies in front of you, you can't untarget anything.
I didn't like that. No, I didn't like that.
I disagree because switch is actually what I use. And
Okay.
you actually can untarget if you just hold down before you press target. But yeah, go on.
You hold down on the control stick and
you hold down. Yeah, you hold down and then target, and then you won't retarget the other one.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know, like, just the way Link moves, the way the combat works. Like, I would just get frustrated. You often like jump and slash, and you miss somebody because of a weird angle. The cameras struggle. There were a couple of the puzzles and stuff that did really frustrate me. I didn't like Jabu Jabu. That might be because I don't understand what doors are, but
it's pretty common to not like Jabu.
I really did not like Forest Temple at all. I know that's where I left off as a kid. I just don't like Forest Temple, and at that point, like up to that point in the game, I was like, I'm not really enjoying Ocarina of Time, and then the whole rest of the game, I thought kind of knocked it out of the park. I really enjoyed it, but that, the child dungeons, the first two are like whatever, and then Jabu Jabu, then Forest, I was just like, ugh, I'm not enjoying this, and expecting Water Temple to be just terrible, and ended up really enjoying the later dungeons, but those sections were fairly frustrating for me for sure. There's a couple points that are a bit cryptic, but a lot less so than early Zelda, but definitely struggled against the controls 30 hours in. I never really felt comfortable controlling this game. I mean, I wasn't like dying all the time or anything, but I just never felt fully like I was controlling Link. I felt like I was solving puzzles and then like, oh, let's stab around till I get to the next room. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts on it. I did really enjoy my 30-hour playthrough, or 20. I don't remember how many hours it was. And I think it's not a game I probably would have gone back to and finished. And I'm really glad I did, because I didn't realize how good all those later dungeons are. They're really good.
For sure. So I guess I'll let you start, since you're going to have probably the most... the number that separates from the rest of us. So
yeah, it's not going to be that bad. I was actually going to say 7.5, but I'm going to go ahead and up it to an 8, actually. Just kind of talked myself into it through this process. I really do hate the controls, like a lot more than I've expressed in this conversation, and there's definitely several points of the game that I found to be not fun and frustrating, but the majority of it I thought was really good. I honestly think the big thing that stood out to me was dungeon design. I think that and Link's Awakening are two of the Zeldas that really started developing actual complex dungeon-sized puzzles. The Water Temple is a dungeon-sized puzzle. You have to change different configurations of the Water Temple to get to different levels, to do different things, and that happened in Link's Awakening actually as well. There's a dungeon where you have to knock down different pillars to lower the level in certain places, and that changes the layout of the dungeon. I think that is really the kind of game design you expect from Nintendo, really quality dungeon design that makes Zelda what it is, that makes it special way, but more than, no offense, something like The Hobbit or something more generic as a platformer, like the dungeon design is what makes Zelda one of the greatest franchises of all time, and this game shined in that way, so I got to give it an 8.
Yeah, you talked yourself into the score I was going to give it. I think that there's too many flaws for it to be a perfect game, but I think that maybe it's just the nostalgia talking, but This game is important for a number of reasons. I think that you could have done a way worse job transitioning into 3 dimensions for the first
Oh
time.
yeah.
I think that they obviously took a lot of care with the concept. There's obviously a lot of love for the idea of the world being the most important piece of the puzzle. And so, you know, when you walk out of Kokiri Forest for the first time, rather than sort of just introducing you to the next area up, for instance, you know, something slightly larger to get you acclimated, it just hits you all at once with just this grand size and really just trying to make you fall in love with the sheer scale of things. I mean, we look at it now and we kind of laugh because compared to other games, Hyrule Field really isn't that large. But at the time, I mean, interacting with something on this scale was just unbelievable.
It's the same thing they did with Breath of the Wild too. I mean,
Yeah.
I bet they probably thought of this game when designing that, in terms of when you leave that cave and you see the world like in Breath of the Wild. Like, I got chills. I think, like, it's just amazing, and that's kind of what this feel was back in the day. I don't have a lot of nostalgia for the game, even though I enjoyed playing it quite a bit in my room while listening to Sublime. Shout outs to that band. But like, you know, even without the nostalgia, I think the game is really good game. But I still think Link to the Past and Link's Awakening are better games in comparison to the other games on the consoles. But I really love the game still, and despite its flaws. What about you, ZFG? We talking 10?
For me, yeah, shocker, but it's a 10. It is my favorite game.
Sure.
Always has been. Like I everything that you guys praise, like I do love the dungeons. I love the overworld. I think there, even though there's like not these huge side quests like Majora's Mask, I still think there's like a good amount of extra content scattered around everywhere. Like all the areas are interesting. I like almost everything about the game.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can't get higher praise than that. I like
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
I completely get
I
it.
have a few. There's like a few like speedrunner type things that I don't like, you know, the cutscenes and text and stuff. That's too slow. But other than those things, like the speedrunner complaints, it's a pretty good game.
Yeah, and it does it honestly. One thing we didn't touch as well, it does a really good job of kind of doing some character development, which is not something you get too much of in any of them but Link's Awakening. I'd say Link's Awakening does a little bit of this, but this does more with, you've got Rudo and you've got what is her name? It's not Sarah.
Saria.
Saria.
What? That's not a name. Okay, anyway, Saria, and you know, you have all these different characters actually talking. It feels like it has more of a personality, and I think they did even more of that in Majora's Mask, from what I understand. But you go into town and you just talk to random people, and in like, I guess even in like Link to the Past or Zelda 1, like they wouldn't really say anything interesting, but this one kind of tried to give everybody a personality, which was a lot of fun. I think it really makes you more attached to the world that you're in, and they really started that with Link's Awakening and continued it, you know, to this day, which I think is really good. For sure. All right. So that, I mean, I didn't offend you, ZFG, right? We're still friends?
Yeah, not offended.
Okay, so I did I mean, I was gonna go 7.5. I think you all thought I was gonna give it a 5 or something. I don't know what you think I was.
Well, the way you were complaining when you played it, I thought you were gonna give it a 2.
Well, it controls like, it controls not good. You don't control the whole thing is you're controlling the Link, the little Link guy in there, but it doesn't control very well. Okay. So that's very frustrating. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to talk to the man himself about all of the speedrun things. So, like usual, we want to talk a little bit about the speedrun, and it benefits us for different games to talk about things in different orders. So, usually we'll start with maybe categories, and then people, and then history, and then tricks, or whatever order that we do things in. But this game, really what makes it special is the way that the categories break down. So, that's going to really inform the way that we talk about all of the different techniques, and what's banned where, and what it actually affects in the game,
things like that. So just to start off with, let's talk a little bit about any percent. So the current any percent record is a 1707, and the rules very simply just say no restrictions.
That's a
Now,
lot faster than I beat it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a pretty good history of the any percent world record by Retro on YouTube. I don't know if that incorporates everything, but it is very detailed, and it goes all the way back to 2003 with Twin Galaxies. But so what makes any percent really special? I know that it's gone between a variety of different consoles. It's gone through a variety of different versions, things like that. What really makes any percent tick?
Yeah, so what's so special about any percent is it just shows like how broken the game is because of how much you can skip. And like over the years, it's gone from, basically glitchless to skipping some things, skipping a lot of things, skipping almost everything. So back in the day, like 2005 or so, wasn't a whole lot of glitches. There's like some small tech like walking backwards is faster, and you can skip these little things here and there. In 2006 or so, we found ways to get to the Shadow Temple and Spirit Temple early. And what was really important about that is you could skip the first 3 adult dungeons, and so that cut the total dungeon count from 5 to 8. And then a few years later, you could skip the Door of Time. That cut out all the child dungeons. Now there's only 2 left. Then there's this glitch that was actually found several years before called Reverse Bottle Adventure, which I'm sure we can get into a bit later about the details of that. It was found earlier on, but wasn't really understood until a while later. And then you could use that to skip another 2 dungeons, getting the total dungeon count to 0. And then even when there's 0 dungeons to do, there was a way to wrong warp from the first dungeon to the last dungeon, or to the end of the game, like to beat Ganon. And now you can beat the game in under 20 minutes. So any percent is just this category where you keep skipping stuff, and just shows like how much you can skip in the game, how broken the game is.
Yeah. So the current world record is on a different version that's been historically. I mean, it's changed over time, right? So I mean,
Yeah. So obviously first release on N64, so most runs were done on N64 until re-releases. Up until like 2010 or so, people weren't really picky about what versions they played. It was really just people weren't really worried about what version was faster. I guess that wasn't really something on people's mind at the time. In fact, oddly enough, people actually commonly ran it on the GameCube version, which we now know is very slow because of very slow resets. And then like slowly we kind of realized that the virtual console version was the best for speedrunning around like 2011. So any percent at that time it typically went on the VC version. A few years later, there was the Chinese IQ version that was discovered. It's like super obscure console, only sold in China, and it has faster text. And so people would go get this version just for the faster text for those few extra seconds. And then an interesting thing happened, which is there was a glitch found it's a version exclusive glitch which only works on the GameCube and Virtual Console releases due to some emulator issues. And the Chinese IQ it's essentially N64 hardware.
right.
And so it doesn't get the advantage of that. And also, there's other glitches that are specific to early N64 versions. There's 3 N64 versions, 1.0, 1.1, and 1.2. And the 1.0 and 1.1 versions have a few glitches that the 1.2 version doesn't. And the IQ version happens to be 1.2. So there was this kind of period where, or I guess not period because we're kind of in it right now, but eventually the IQ kind of got obsoleted because every category kind of started using version exclusive glitches, whether it was N64 glitches or VC glitches. And so that's why the IQ's kind of gone out of style.
Okay. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people are very thankful of that.
Yeah, that seems like a very frustrating thing to hunt down on eBay to try and speedrun a game for sure. So I think I'd be remiss without asking this before we dive deeper. When did you start speedrunning this game? Because it sounds like you were saying back in 2005 you were involved?
So I got into the speedrunning community about 2006, 2007, but at the time I was kind of just like messing with glitches. I didn't really start speedrunning until maybe like 2008.
Oh wow, that's still, I mean, way before most people were getting speedrunning, so definitely an OG there. And I do remember the IQ times of running this game, so it's funny to hear back to that again.
Yeah, so the next category is 100%, which the current world record is a 357.38 by you, ZFG. And
Yep.
I know that you've actually commented on not really thinking that the sub 4 milestone was a particularly big deal. You kind of have your sights set on a even better goal, right?
So our boy
Yeah, yeah,
ZFG has some hefty goals coming. Okay, he isn't gonna
yeah.
just be pleased by round numbers.
It's got to be something actually really good. But yeah, like for a long time, sub 4, it was like the goal, as in, could we really push this category down to this, even number milestone? Obviously, it's not technically significant, but everyone loves getting that first digit down by 1.
Sure.
And so, like, in terms of, it was more a milestone in terms of the game's development rather than actual execution. I wouldn't say like my first sub 4 run was bad. It was a 358, so there's been 2 sub 4 runs now. I wouldn't necessarily say it was bad, but it was due to a very significant route change and set of new glitches that like saved a huge amount of time all at once. So in that sense, it kind of became, I guess, I don't know if I should say easy, but it before these glitches, sub 4 was like nearly impossible, if not like maybe by the smallest margin, and now is just very for sure possible. But it was only
definitely make that a lot easier.
yeah, but it's definitely a testament to how far the game has developed. Like the fact that we can find all these tricks that save so much time so many years later, after we've already done so much research and development, and still get the time lower than that is still a huge accomplishment.
Now you notably sort of have a different role than a lot of people who hold prominent world records in a lot of big name titles in the speedrunning community tend to be particularly grind heavy in their approach to speedrunning. So they it's all about just being on the grind constantly, and other people are finding things. But I think that you sort of have an interesting role because it feels like a lot of times for at least 100% you are a prominent figure in the routing / glitch hunting experience yourself. It seems like you would argue that a lot of these discoveries are you're at least a big part in them.
Yeah. I really love routing. I've been working heavily on 100% routing ever since I started seriously running it in like 2012, 2013. As for glitch hunting, I find like some small to medium glitches. I haven't found like the super big ones, but I find a lot of like small stuff, time savers here and there. And especially route changes. And yeah, I just love the routing and the process of like figuring out how to go faster rather than like the actual just the execution of it. I just find it like a really fascinating process to just figure out what you can do to cut out stuff to save more time, all that stuff. It's just one of my favorite parts of speedrunning.
For sure.
Yeah, I believe Chad and I both got into speedrunning in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. At least I did. What's it like seeing your speedrun like kind of develop over a decade, right? 10-year period of time. Like that's completely unique experience. And to see newer discoveries now, it's not as if this game hasn't been, completely dissected for the last 20 years, but still finding these glitches that are now making sub 4, as you say, much more attainable. Like what's that
Yeah.
like?
Yeah, it's crazy that the game still goes down. And we're still finding stuff all the time. What I think is really funny is back in like 2008 when Door Time Skip was found, people were talking about how the game was like, oh my god, this game is so broken. This is like the most broken game ever. And like looking back at it, 2008 OOT was not super broken. It was decently broken, but like compared to what it is now, it's nothing. And we've just like continued to break the game so much more, and it's just so fascinating like how much we can do with this game now.
Yeah, that's a big reason to kind of talk about the history as we are, and like shout out certain runners, people like Narcissa and people who really impacted this community and run, because obviously people's times from 5 years ago are not going to stand the test of time today, even if they were exceptional and revolutionary at the time. So I think that's why even more than most games, history is so important for this speed game.
For sure.
Yeah.
So 100%, it's required to collect a variety of items from their intended sources in the game to complete the inventory screen. And this category is not glitchless, but the glitches are restricted in certain ways to maintain the spirit of the category. And we'll talk a little bit about a 100% category that removes those restrictions as well. So next up is sort of I put these together in a pair, though it doesn't really seem like they necessarily go together specifically. There's no I Am Wrong Warp and all dungeons. So the no I Am Wrong Warp speedrun is in an hour 14:40, so we're starting to get into a sort of mid-length category for this game. And the world record there is by Bonnaroo. And so this category focuses on you just need to beat the last two dungeons, Spirit and Shadow, but there's a lot more cutscenes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so the No I Am Wrong Warp category, it essentially bans the most extreme glitches, those being Reverse Bottle Adventure, Get Item Manipulation, and Wrong Warp. Those are just like these glitches where, you can start modifying your inventory and warp to, the end of the game. So it's like this category where you can still use most glitches, but not the most extreme of them all. And so the basic idea of is you want to beat Shadow and Spirit Temple as soon as possible, because that's what gives you access to light arrows, and then you can use light arrows to defeat Ganon. And yeah, so it does have a bit more cutscenes. There are some other categories where, because of glitches mainly like Reverse Bottle Adventure and Get Item Manipulation, you can skip some extra cutscenes, like meeting Zelda for the first time, getting the light arrows. Those are two like fairly long cutscenes that this category does have to do. But the category in general is very newcomer friendly. That's typically one of the two categories that newcomers do, either that or any percent. It's not, too. If you want to like go for the best strats, there's some like really hard, complicated stuff you can do. But for beginners, there's fairly simple, easy strats you can do, not too overwhelming.
Okay. So, like, would you say that most people always start with any percent and then migrate to this, or is there a pretty large group of people who just skip any percent entirely and go straight to No I Am Wrong Warp?
I'm not sure the exact numbers, but I'm sure there's a good number of both. Because I know a lot of people, even when they get into speedrunning, they're not too interested in any percent. Because it does skip almost the entire game. There are people that would like to see more of the game than just Kokiri Forest and Ganon's Castle and Deku Tree.
It's something that's really nice about Zelda speedrunning community in general, is that they find a way of making these categories that let you experience kind of the full casual experience while also implementing glitches and tricks. NMG is definitely the most popular category in Link to the Past, instead of doing any percent. And it sounds like in this case, the any percent is something you might learn after actually learning something that has a little bit more meat to it, or a little bit more of the actual gameplay that you had as a kid.
Yeah.
So all dungeons is the other side to this coin, and I paired them together because their world records are actually very close to each other. No I Am Wrong Warp is an hour 14. All dungeons is an hour 20 by SVA, which is actually a name that many people might be familiar with. SVA is a titan in a lot of the 3D Zelda speedruns. But this is a lot more of a technical category, as you described it. You have to do all the dungeons, so you're not just limiting it down to Shadow and Spirit. But what really makes all dungeons a lot more technical in that regard?
Yeah, so there's a lot more you have to do. Like, not only because you have to do all the dungeons, there's a lot more tricks you have to learn. Like 2 dungeons versus 8, there's just straight up more to learn to it. And there's also some wrong warps that are much more complicated to do. Like some of the more basic wrong warps, like in any percent. Any percent's a fairly not a straightforward wrong warp, but a relatively easy wrong warp to learn. There's a few other wrong warps done in other categories that aren't too complicated. The ones in all dungeons are a bit more. There's a bit more to it to learn, and yeah, there's a lot more glitches that you really have to be good at. Like you have to be better at like super sliding and hessing and hovering and some other stuff like that.
Are there any restrictions on the glitches there? I mean, it's 8 dungeons,
no, all
dungeons,
dungeons,
an hour 20.
No, all dungeons has no glitch restrictions whatsoever.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense though,
includes...
because if you have a dungeon like Water Temple that you generally skip in all these other categories, there's going to be tricks and things you have to learn for that you might not have to learn for any other category. I mean, it seems like most of the categories you have to do some of like Shadow or Spirit and some other ones, but those other dungeons are going to have glitches too that you would have to learn new stuff for.
Yeah, although the flip side to that is some of the glitches or some of the dungeons have glitches to like essentially skip the entire thing. Like Shadow Temple, like you go through like 3 or 4 rooms to get the hover boots, and then as soon as you get the hover boots, you do a glitch to go straight to the boss. The same thing happens in a few other dungeons, but but even then, like some of those glitches aren't exactly easy. Like the glitch I just mentioned for Shadow Temple, there's a newer method that's actually fairly straightforward. But there was an older method to do the same thing that was like about a minute longer. That was significantly more complex. Like it was a new runner killer. Like you really need to know a lot about the game to really understand that trick and get it.
Awesome.
For sure.
There's also Medallion Stones and Trials MST. That's a 154.49 by Marco, and that involves all the dungeons and then the trials, which are those rooms right before you get to Ganon, right? That each one kind of corresponds to a certain dungeon, and there's a ban on RBA for that as well. Is that a fairly heavily run category, or?
It's kind of goes through these periods of like a lot of activity and low activity. I think right now it's kind of in a low activity point right now. But yeah, it's been at some point it's been like one of the most commonly run categories, and then at some points it's been one of the least run. But yeah, it's similar to all dungeons in the requirements, but adds the trials and removes RBA, and those things alone add quite a bit of time. The trials alone take about 10 minutes, and RBA, some of the side effects of not being able to do RBA costs quite a bit of time in terms of cutscenes.
Oh, so you can't just trigger the cutscenes to have already been seen using RBA.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there's quite a bit more content in MST. Personally, I actually have gone back and forth between what category I like more between all dungeons and MST. Currently, I like MST more. I think it has more content, which is the content is more interesting in my opinion for MST. There's been times where like all dungeons had the more interesting content, then it kind of got stale in some cases, and because of the evolution of the route, like the route for all dungeons, it used to be this super really interesting, complicated thing, and then there was a while where all dungeons had almost the same route as MST, and then the route changed again to be significantly different from MST again. So they've gone back and forth on being like super similar and super different.
That makes sense. So we've got Glitchless here as well. So Glitchless sort of has an interesting history behind it. The current world record is 3 hours and 43 minutes and 38 seconds by Danny B. Full name Danny B 21892. But you were talking before we started recording about how it kind of went through a change where it has two separate subcategories, right?
Yeah, so glitchless, obviously in a game like so heavily glitched as this, some people are going to want a glitchless category. And for a long time, one of the problems with creating a glitchless category for this game is there's a lot of gray area. You'll see people arguing all the time, oh my god, that's a glitch, this shouldn't be allowed in this category or whatever. And so the category initially had a lot of very controversial things. There were ways to like skip parts of dungeons that people weren't really super supportive of, and it came to a climax in like I want to say it was like middle of last year, where there was a glitch found to skip past the Gerudo Gate as child and get to Spirit Temple early without technically doing what would be referred to by the rules as a glitch, because the way the rules were worded is you can't do techniques that were not intended, which is stuff like damage boosting is okay because damage boosting is an intended mechanic. If you get hit, you kind of go flying.
Right. But
you can't do stuff like the infinite sword glitch, which is an unintended mechanic.
Sure.
And so there was this way to get to Spirit Temple early only by doing a damage boost. But hey, this is a huge sequence break. This kind of cuts out like 10 minutes of the game. Is this really something that should be allowed in the glitchless category? And then shortly after that, there was a similar thing found with the trials in Ganon's Castle. You could skip the trials with just a damage boost. So is it a glitch or not? And so this caused the categories to be split. So now there's what's called glitchless and bug limit. So glitchless, the general way the categories are made is the bug limit category typically takes the controversial stuff and allows them, while glitchless takes the controversial stuff and bans them.
Okay. And bug limit's a name that actually comes from the JRTA community. I've seen that a lot on Japanese leaderboards. That specific term, bug limit, which is kind of interesting.
I thought it was talking about the bugs that you pick up at the bottle. I didn't realize because you do tricks with those, so I would have thought that was it. That's funny.
It's kind of interesting. This just goes to show, you know, I think Ocarina of Time has done a fantastic job in terms of the categories of not really trying to mince too many words about what is and what isn't a glitch. It's just each category says, here's the list of things you're not allowed to do, and that's that. There's a certain spirit that's intended for every single category, and it's just very explicit. Like, we just don't want, you know, item manipulation. We just don't want wrong warp in these categories. And it just goes to show how hairy things get as soon as you just say the word glitchless. As soon as you leave it at that, it's open to interpretation. It's no longer this fixed thing about what is and isn't allowed, but now it's up to, do you feel like this is glitch enough? I mean, you run into the same thing with, like, you know, A Link to the Past's main category is no major glitches. And so every time something new is found, you have to go through the discussion of, is this a major glitch? Or is this just kind of like a little baby glitch and we don't mind it so much?
Yeah.
So
yeah, defining a glitchless category is terrible. I've told the story before that my first speedrun I ever learned was Mega Man 1 glitchless, and just figuring out, wait, but is that a glitch because, like, I'm not supposed to pause and phase up the ladder faster, but, like, it kind of also happens naturally sometimes, and I hate living in that world. So just
yeah, there can be
glitches.
so many gray areas.
yeah, it's rough. So there's a Ganonless category, which is my favorite named category in any game ever.
Wow.
And the Ganonless category is just wrong warping into the Ganon cutscene. So you beat the game by not beating Ganon. You just warp straight into the cutscene.
It doesn't sound like you really care that much about Hyrule at all then.
Yeah, that's kind of like this interesting legacy category where, to go into a little bit of history, when wrong warping was found, it was found in February of 2012, and the initial way it changed any percent is you wrong warped into the credits. And then 2 months later is when it was found you could wrong warp from Deku Tree to Ganon's castle, which took you to the Ganon fight, not to the credits, but it still ended up being faster overall. And so the Ganonless is kind of this remnant of this 2-month period where any percent was wrong warp to the credits, and so that's the goal for that category.
Oh, okay. Really cool. I mean, that makes sense. That. Like, you find something really neat like that, and it's like you don't want that legacy to disappear, even though now it's not the fastest option.
Yeah, but it's the fastest option for beating the game and not killing Ganon, so why not make a category about it? I like it.
That's pretty cool. The world record for that, by the way, is 32 minutes and 16 seconds by Zudu right now. So the other side of 100%, so 100%, while it's not a glitchless category, and in fact over time other glitches have become permitted, it's actually become an even more permissive category. There are limitations on it because the spirit of the category is to end up collecting all the items from their original sources. And so there is a category called 100% no source requirement. The world record for that is 3 hours, 4 minutes, and 39 seconds by ZFG. And do you want to speak a little bit about what you actually end up doing that sort of removes that source requirement?
Yeah, so the whole thing with no source requirement is there's ways to get certain items like heart pieces and gold skulltulas essentially infinitely or just a lot at a time. So in the regular 100% category, you have to get each individual gold skulltula, each individual heart piece, and every item from its original location. Whereas no source requirement just says, have 100 gold skulltulas, have 20 hearts, have all your items. How you get them, who cares? And so what that category does is you can farm a huge amount of gold skulltulas at once. There's this glitch where you can spawn 97 gold skulltulas at once in about a 3.5-minute period. So you get, you know, almost all the skulltulas right there. The only reason it's 97 and not 100 is the game's own limitations. You just can't get those last 3, so you gotta pick up 3 other random ones. For heart pieces, you can do a similar thing where in Lost Woods, you play Saria's song for Skull Kid for a heart piece. You can dupe that Skull Kid so that he gives you, you know, as many heart pieces as you want. There's an interesting catch to that where your game screen will freeze because there's too much stuff loaded on the screen. So there's an 8-minute period in the run where the game screen is frozen, which is one of my favorite things in speedrunning this game.
8 minutes.
Yeah, when you do runs of it, you actually pop text up on the screen saying, "I assure you that the game is still running."
Yes, yeah, I always have to do that, or else chat will freak out. And it's my goal, by the way, to run this category at a GDQ someday, specifically for that section.
Do you think that would be a good time for donations?
Yes. It would be the best time in the marathon for donations.
It's ultimately a really cool glitch, sort of taking advantage of jumping back and forth through a loading zone to duplicate things. But it's It's real. And isn't there sort of a restriction on what versions you can do that on?
It's not a restriction, but the best version to do it on is the GameCube version. For some reason, I'm not sure the exact specifics of why, but the GameCube version can just load more stuff than any other version. And when it comes to these duping glitches, it's really significant. Like, I think you can get something like 30 extra gold Skulltulas and like 10 extra, maybe more heart pieces, just because of the GameCube version. And so it's really interesting because the GameCube version kind of sucks for every single other category. And then for this one category, it's the best by a more significant amount than any other category difference for any other version difference for other categories.
That's
Right.
funny.
That's fantastic.
And
Also-
then
Go ahead.
and then going just back to the other glitches that are used in that category,
Mhm.
there's also RBA. So RBA, again, it is allowed in regular 100%, but you are still required to get each item from its original source. And in no source requirement, that's not required. And so you can't use RBA to get like everything in the game. There are restrictions on how much you can really get with RBA because it only goes up to certain item values, and at that point you just have to get items normally.
So it might be time to finally say what RBA actually is. So can you talk a little bit about the history of bottle adventure and reverse bottle adventure?
Yeah. So reverse bottle adventure and bottle adventure, I guess bottle adventure specifically was found in 2005. It's this glitch where you can get different items on your B button by getting a bottle on your B button, going back and forward in time, and then when you go forward in time, the game looks at child's C right button, and it'll put a certain value associated with that button onto your B button. And so you can essentially use this to get any item on your B button. And then a few years later, well, there's like this other glitch where when you catch something in a bottle on your B button, it'll modify parts of your inventory based on your C right item. And this wasn't really well understood until maybe like 2007, even though it was a required part of Bottle Adventure, which was found in 2005. So it was, understood a few years later, and then we really realized that you could just put certain items on your C right button and then just get items. Like one of the biggest uses for Reverse Bottle Adventure is the Adult Trade Item quest for Begoron Sword. And a lot of these items just point to really important places in your inventory, like some of the upgrades, the medallions, the songs. So, for example, the Poacher's Saw is a really big one. The Poacher's Saw, just one of the items in the trade quest, you put that on C right and catch something on it, and you can get the Prelude of Light, the Nocturne of Shadow, Serenade of Water, Zelda's Lullaby, just by catching some bugs. And it's a really, that item specifically is a huge part of no source requirement because it means you don't have to meet Zelda. It means you don't have to watch the Nocturne of Shadow cutscene. It means you don't have to do these other requirements for other certain things. And so the fact that you can just catch something in a bottle and just get an item is really big for that category. Again, you can't do it for everything, but you can do it for a lot of stuff that's really important.
Right. Okay. So there's a few other categories here. There's max percent child, which is kind of an interesting concept of a category. It's getting basically 100% of the items you're capable of getting, but never switching to adult.
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite things in the game, just because it's just like the whole idea is about pushing the game as far as possible in terms of what you can do with glitches, because obviously in the game, you're a child and you become adult, and the most of the game opens up when you become adult. And the whole idea is don't become adult, see how much stuff you can do only as child. And so the more glitches that are found, the more we can actually expand that category, the more items you can get. And right now, we're at a pretty good amount of stuff. I think it's like 16 or 17 hearts. You can beat every dungeon except for Spirit Temple. You can pretty much get all the items. There's like one item that you can technically get with the task, but not realistically real time, which is fire arrows.
Okay.
So yeah, it's so interesting because there's so many crazy glitches you have to use that would never be used in any other category, and it's really hard too. Like the tricks in that category are very difficult, and there's so much to learn about that category.
Yeah, the leaderboard for this category actually On speedrun.com, the category extensions board actually has, as the miscellaneous categories, obsoleted versions of the leaderboard for exactly the reason you were saying. If you figure out you can get one new item, you kind of got to start the board over again, right?
Yeah.
Everything you've had
That's
before is no
tough.
longer max % child, because you could have gotten one more thing. So
Yeah, that's kind of a difficult thing to adjust to over time. I'm sure that, hopefully you'll settle on that, because that sounds really cool. I definitely enjoy watching to see how far you can take it as child Link, because obviously you're not supposed to be in a lot of places. And that's one cool thing about the speedrun is seeing, adult Link in, what's the
Dodongo's
Gerudo
Cavern.
Temple, Dodongo's Cavern, and being kid, you can be Kid Link other places, and just that's
Yeah.
a really cool part of the game for sure. The speedrun.
The world record, by the way, I didn't mention, I don't think, was 7 hours 14 seconds and 34 seconds by 7 hours 14 minutes and 34 seconds by Super Gurur 3. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that really well, but there's a lot more R's than there are vowels, so it's kind of tough.
Yeah.
And
And
finally,
the last category we have is Master Quest, all dungeons and all dungeon sculptulas, but not normal sculptulas, just the ones in the dungeons, I'm assuming.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So I guess just a quick overview of Master Quest. Only it's a version of the game where all the dungeons are redesigned, but everything in the overworld is the same and the base mechanics are the same. So a lot of the main categories, they're a little bit different. They're not a huge amount different. Any percent does like 2 rooms in Decatry differently. All dungeons does a few things differently, but kind of the same general concept. Even 100%, obviously, even though you have to do all the new Master Quest stuff, all the overworld stuff is the same. So it's kind of like a half different, half the same category. And so that's the reason this category was created, Master Quest All Dungeons and Dungeon Skulltulas. So it's specifically all the different stuff in Master Quest that's required. That's why it's specifically all the Dungeon Skulltulas, because the Dungeon Skulltulas are all different and changed around, but everything in the overworld is the same. So the entire point of the category is just do the different stuff.
that's a neat idea.
And yeah, it's really interesting because all the dungeons are changed in really significant ways that like you use completely different glitches that you would use in the regular version. There's glitches that are literally never used in regular OOT that get used in Master Quest. And yeah, it's got a lot of really cool stuff like that.
I think a
Zelda
lot of
1
people,
has a similar thing with there's a newer glitch that was found that's really only beneficial in second quest, but it hasn't made it to the normal game. It's kind of cool to see stuff like that.
it's funny, a lot of people sometimes criticize games for having really arbitrary categories, but I think that's one of the things that's really nice about the ability to just sort of create categories, is that you can highlight the part that's interesting. So if you did Master Quest All Dungeons, or Master Quest 100%, exactly like you were saying, it's not going to differ significantly from normal 100%, but this allows you to just do the parts that are interesting. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you definitely are much better known for 100%. Your name shows up on a lot of different leaderboards. I mean, the only leaderboard that I didn't see your name pretty near the top was any percent. And I think the category that you're best known for is 100%, and certainly your contributions to the routing. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the history of 100%, especially from where you jumped in? I mean, at what point in 100% did you really jump into it?
Yeah, so the point that I really got super interested in 100% was around 2010. Around 2010, a few people in the Zelda speedrunning community wanted to do a team segmented speedrun. And so what was really cool about this is we were going to play it on the virtual console version. And on that version, you can save a save file to your SD card and just send it to someone else, and they can just pick up the save file and play with that. And so we were thinking of doing a segmented run all together, just like all the best runners, and try to just come together and create a really good segmented run of this. And it was a really cool idea. We got like halfway through. It kind of slow at times. New tricks were being found that would kind of obsolete things, make us have to redo things. Eventually, it kind of died off just because of how much stuff was getting obsoleted. And then around 2010, I did like a modified version of the route for a single segment run. Got like a 7-hour time. And I really wanted to do more of the category because I thought it was really fun, but it was just such a long run that I never really got to do more of it. And then a few years later, Runner Guy started doing runs of it. and a few other people started doing runs, and so it was actually people were actually kind of starting to do single segment runs of it, which people just didn't do before. And it was in about 2012, late 2012, that I really got interested in really taking the category seriously. I guess I should go actually earlier in 2012. There was a big glitch found called early eyeball frog, where in the Bigorn Sword trading quest, there's like, this huge trading quest where you have to take an item to an NPC, give it to another NPC,
Right.
and you would eventually get the Bigorn Sword. And it's this really long quest, and there's this glitch to get the eyeball frog from King Zora, which is one of the latest items in the trade quest, just by holding the R button while you talk to him.
Sure.
It's a very it's a very convenient glitch that saved at the time like 6 or 7 minutes. It was pretty huge, and it was interestingly enough only possible on the N64 1.0 and 1.1 versions. So for years, that would actually be the fastest version, only until like 6 months ago, 8 months ago.
I have to
Does he
ask.
give you the? Does he give you the frog normally in the trade quest or no?
Yeah, he does.
Okay,
But I
but for
have
some
to
reason
ask-
holding on. Just...
So he's supposed to give you 2 different items. One, he's supposed to give you the Zora tunic just by unfreezing him, and then 2, he gives you the eyeball frog if you do the quest normally. So you act like you're getting the Zora tunic, and then holding the R button changes his action to give you.
And that's
the
all
eyeball
you
frog.
have to do. That's all you have to do is just hold R.
Yeah, the one extra exception is that you have to have something in your trade item slot. So you at least have to start the quest just by getting at least the egg, or even using RBA to get a bottle in that slot. So you have to have something there. But as long as something is there, it doesn't matter what it is, you get the frog.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Not all glitches are hard, Chad.
I know,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I hear it and I think I must have heard it wrong, because that sounds too easy.
Yeah, it is that easy.
Okay.
But yeah, that was found in 2012, and then later that year, and then early 2013 is when I really started taking it seriously. The time was, at the time early eyeball frog was found, the time was 5:49, and then like that trick plus the fact that we started switching from the English version to the Japanese version saved a huge amount of time. So it was like getting near the 5-hour mark at around the 2012, 2013 era.
Right.
And then that's when I really started taking it seriously. I started, looking more into the route, trying to find more time savers. And then from 2013 on, I just kept trying to find new strats, kept running the category, kept pushing the time down. And then over the years, just kept going down over and over until we're near 4 hours, under 4 hours.
Nice.
Yeah, so man, I can't. I'm so stuck on early eyeball frog. I'm thinking about all the kids out there who'd never got the Zora tunic because they accidentally held R.
We were actually, when we first found it, we thought like there's no way it could be that simple, because surely we would have found it years earlier.
Yes.
In fact, it was found by someone just accidentally pressing R. Someone was doing a race. I forgot what the race was, but someone was just trying to get the Zora tunic and accidentally held R, and there was your frog. And then people were mystified on what just happened.
Now you said that when so we'll talk a little bit about a few more of these tricks after a quick break, but you mentioned that when one of these tricks was found, the get item manipulation glitch in 2015, the rules changed. So what actually ended up motivating the rules for the category overall to change just because of a new glitch?
Yeah, so for a long time, reverse bottle adventure was banned, and this is because, again, that's a glitch where you can just catch, something in a bottle and then suddenly you get an item. And so we felt that kind of defeated the purpose of 100%. It didn't feel right to allow that kind of glitch in the category. But at the same time, a lot of the community did not like banning any glitches at all, period, for that category, for any category, or for most categories.
I was gonna go.
And where was I?
So
So yeah,
item...
we
Good.
Yeah. So get item manipulation was found, and the thing about RBA is like not only can you just use it to get items, but you can also use it to change your item amounts. And this was something in particular that people didn't feel like should be banned. Like, you can just use RBA to get more bombs or more bomb shoes. Why should this be banned? And so that was a leading argument for it being unbanned. And then get item manipulation was found in 2015, and it's this glitch where you can just you can use it to get actual C items in your inventory. So one restriction of RBA is you could not use it to get actual C items, like you know, light arrows or something like that.
Sure.
Where get item manipulation, you could do that. So it's very similar in nature to RBA, where you just get an item in your inventory. And so this new glitch was found, and we didn't want to ban it from the category because we thought, you know, we just don't like banning glitches in general. But we should probably do the same thing with this as RBA. They should be treated as the same thing.
Sure.
And so we eventually decided if we're going to allow GIM, we got to allow RBA. But this is when the source requirement rule was put in place, where you have to get each item from its original source. And this is so that you could do RBA if you wanted. You just couldn't use it to, you know, not get an item otherwise.
Right. You couldn't not open the bow chest. You could get the bow early, but you just couldn't not open the chest eventually.
Exactly.
That makes sense. All right, well, let's take a really quick break. We've been talking a lot. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll be right back, and we'll talk a little bit about some more specific tricks. So to sort of wrap up the speedrun discussion, a lot of these tricks and tech that we wanted to talk about, we've already covered. And that's kind of one of the nice things about talking about the categories first, is that each category sort of has its own approach to the glitches, and it gives us an opportunity to actually talk about them in the appropriate context. But there's still a few that tend to show up in most every category and maybe haven't been explained fully, so we want to go through a few of them. And I think the first one, the one that's most visible, if you're watching a speedrun for the first time, you may not understand exactly what's going on with Bottle Adventure, you could completely miss it, or maybe wrong warping just seems like some sort of magic, but I think the most visible one is probably one of the most basic pieces of movement tech, which is the super slide. Do you want to talk a little bit, ZFG, about the super slide and all of the variety of different fun ways that we get to say those acronyms?
Yeah. So super slide is really interesting. So it was originally found in about 2006. It's this trick where you roll into a grabbable object and try to shield and target, and then as you're coming up from the roll, your shield gets hit, and it sends you backwards really fast. And so it's all based on the fact that you get invincibility near the end of your roll. And so you kind of get hit during this invincibility, and you get the speed, and that speed just keeps on going until you release the R button. And so the original way to do this, just regular super sliding, is only in a straight line. You could use any grabbable object, so grass or bombs, which is the most common way, because you can just use bombs anywhere. And they act as both a damage source and a grabbable object. And so super slides, they were pretty good because they're so fast, but they have a huge limitation in that they can only go straight.
Okay.
And a few years later, ESS was found, and it was actually found in Majora's Mask first. It's ESS stands for Extended Super Slide. So it was found that after doing a super slide, you could hold very slightly outside the dead zone on a control stick, and then you can like do this slightly slower slide out of the super slide that you would be able to change your angle for. And so the idea was, you do a super slide, and then where you get to the end of it, you kind of go into extended super slide. So you still get, most of the speed, not quite all of it, but you can start changing your angles. And so it was a nice little tech, but not super useful.
So it's all about like holding the controller in a very specific spot in the dead zone of the controller?
Yeah, it has to be just outside the dead zone. It's essentially the smallest input on the control stick.
Yeah, so the dead zone refers to, for an analog controller, the amount of movement you can move the controller before it starts actually considering it input. So if you're still within the dead zone, you can move the controller that amount, but it doesn't like do anything.
Joystick.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then a few years later, also in Majora's Mask, it was found that you could do an extended super slide, not starting from a super slide, but with super slide speed by just rolling into the bomb. And so it was found initially in Majora's Mask, but because of the differences in the bomb physics and Link's recoil physics, it was thought to be Majora's Mask only. And then a handful of years later, it turns out you could do it in OOT, still by rolling into a bomb, but just doing it slightly differently. Whereas you had to roll into the explosion would knock you back, and you would take the speed from the knockback. In OOT, you have to roll like in the middle of the explosion. You get hit like several times inside the explosion, and then from there you can take the speed and turn it into an ESS. And that was called Hyperextended Super Slide, or HES. And so that has become a huge, important movement tech in OOT, where anytime you're crossing a decent amount of distance, you want to be doing a HES because it's significantly faster than anything else you can do.
That makes sense. And
it's interesting how many Zelda glitches circle around bombs and the bomb mechanics. Like, people have always found out how to use the bombs in Zelda to break the game, which is pretty
cool. Yeah, bombs are pretty great.
The bombs make your Zelda move, so you gotta take advantage of that where possible.
Something to do with the fact that it can damage you also, and usually has a knockback that it's combined into so much stuff, which is just fascinating to me.
And you could do that through water as well, right? I know that there's a term West, but I don't really know what it is. Right?
Yeah. So the entire point of ESS and HES and everything is that you can conserve your speed with the ESS position on the control stick. It makes Link do this like shuffling with his feet thing that just happens to lock your speed. And in water, for a short amount of time when you enter water, you also keep your speed. So if you were to go into water with a lot of speed, and then that water kind of goes onto land with a slope, then you can take the water conserving your speed and then use ESS to also carry that to land.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So we've talked about Super Slide. We've talked about Bottle Adventure. I think a lot of these categories are really they're hinged on wrong warping. And I think from a technical standpoint, wrong warping is really fascinating. I think it's really easy to understand what's happening. You're just going through some loading zone and you end up somewhere you weren't expecting to be. But like, what goes into setting up a wrong warp? Like, what's going on with a wrong warp?
Yeah. So what's happening with a wrong warp is some other cutscene is starting to play when you are trying to leave or enter some other area. So, for example, the common one that most people know about is the Decatry to Ganon's Castle one. Right. So what you're doing there is the blue warp is starting to go to the Kakiri Emerald cutscene, and that's a cutscene in Kakiri Forest where the Decatry gives you the Kakiri Emerald, but that's starting to play at the same time that you leave Decatry and go into or you leave Goma's room and go back into Decatry. So the game tries to start the cutscene in the Decatry, but the values don't add up right, and it ends up going down the game's internal map list, just based on the way the math works out with the cutscene value and the map value. And so it just happens to land on the map value for Ganon's Castle. And so it's all just based on the way the game orders the map list.
Okay. So are there any like notable places that you can wrong warp to that maybe aren't useful for speedruns? I know that, like, for instance, you can wrong warp into the credits cutscene, which I think is sort of fascinating, knowing how the wrong warp works, knowing that you're able to wrong warp into that cutscene. Are there any sort of notable other wrong warps you can do that maybe don't have as much usefulness in the speedrun?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of really cool wrong warps you can do. You can wrong warp into the intro cutscene. You can wrong warp into some unused beta areas, like you can wrong warp into a unused version of Jabu where there's actually an extra heart piece, and there's also a lot of like the dungeon is very clearly unfinished. There's doors that are not in the right place.
Listen, the doors don't work in Jabu anyways. I promise you.
They work even worse in the beta version. But
Okay.
yeah, there's a lot of cool wrong warps like that. You can wrong warp to also a beta version of the graveyard, which also has an extra heart piece. So just a little like side fact: there's actually 39 heart pieces in the game,
Wow.
rather than the 36 that you'd normally get.
So
Two of
for
them,
I was
two
gonna
of
ask
them you
for
get with wrong warps.
100%. I was gonna ask for 100% no source requirement. If you get more than 36, if you get up to 40, can you get a 21st heart container or something like that?
Yeah, the rules only say you have to get up to 20, but yes, you can get much more than that. Just the extra 3 heart pieces obviously isn't going to get you to
Right.
21, but there's other glitches you can do with heart piece duping that can get you very, very high. I don't actually know if there's definitely not a hard limit on hearts, but there should be a hard limit on how much you can load with certain glitches. I don't know what the exact number is, but I'm fairly sure you can probably get over 100 hearts.
And would
If
they
you
just not
really,
show visually, but they would actually add to the damage?
actually, no, they do show visually. The second row of hearts actually just keeps extending across the
Oh my
screen,
gosh.
and then eventually loops around.
I
And
love
but the getting 100 hearts thing, it would take a very long time because I mentioned the Skull Kid duping thing. You can only do that. Well, you can do a lot for that. You can probably get around 100 heart pieces with that, but that'll only take you to 40-ish hearts. There's a different glitch you can do where you can dupe Twin Rova, the boss of Spirit Temple, and she'll appear essentially once every 8 minutes. So you can get like an extra heart container once every 9 or 10 minutes, just factoring in the extra cutscenes. So if you really want to get extra heart containers, you fight Twin Rova over and over again, 10 minutes at a time, and get lots of hearts that way.
I'm ready to add 100 heart piece or 100 hearts percent to the leaderboard and get an OOT world record. I'm just gonna hang out there. I'm just gonna keep killing people.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna wait till I get rejected by probably off before it even gets to anybody on your side. He'll
Yeah,
find it and
have
just
fun
reject
with
it.
that.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. So you mentioned that one of the most recent big deals in the 100% route was the discovery of equip swap, or at least the utilization of it if it had already been known. So what is equip swap?
Yeah, so it's this really interesting glitch where you can equip an item over a different item slot, which means that one adult can use child items and child can use adult items. And it also means that you can equip the same item twice. And so the reaction to this glitch was kind of weird. So as soon as it was found, we were all like, "Oh my god, this is the next biggest thing in OOT. This is going to be so big." And then the next day, we were like, "This is kind of cool. It's not going to do a whole lot." The first big use of it was big Poe duping. So there's this bottle you have to get where you collect 10 big Poes around Hyrule Field, and you can use this glitch to only have to collect one big Poe, and then you dupe it with equip swap. So that saves quite a bit of time. It saved like 3 minutes when it was found. And then initially we couldn't really think of any other good uses. There was like this one idea to do Jabu as adult because we could now do it as adult because we could use Boomerang, but it didn't quite seem faster, and so we kind of just put it off. It didn't seem as useful as we first thought. And then a few months later, there was other route change idea that came around where at the time in the route, we were still going up Ganon's castle at the end of the game. So, you enter Ganon's castle, you go up the tower, you fight Ganondorf. The tower collapses, you go down, you fight Ganon. And so you could, in theory, skip going up the tower and fighting Ganondorf if you wrong warp to the end of the castle.
That makes
And
sense.
other categories were already doing that. But the big problem with doing it in 100% is that you had to wrong warp from either Deku Tree or Fire Temple to do it. And if you wrong warp from Deku Tree, it means that you could not have already beaten Deku Tree to get the Ocarina of Time, because that's one of the requirements to get Ocarina of Time is have beaten Deku Tree. And same with Fire Temple. Fire Temple was required for the Nocturne of Shadow. And so either of these wrong warps would have to be done at the end of the game. But we couldn't do that at the end of the game because there were still things we had to do afterwards. And so wrong warping to the end of Ganon's castle just wasn't an option for a long time. But equip swap let us it kind of indirectly led to a route change where we could do Jabu early. Then we could do a wrong warp off of the cutscene where Zelda is escaping Hyrule Castle, where you get the Ocarina of Time. And we could use that to wrong warp to the Nocturne of Shadow cutscene. And then because we have Nocturne of Shadow, we could then use Fire Temple to wrong warp. So it's like this kind of indirect route change thing.
Yeah, it all just sort of cascades.
Yeah.
So then equip swap became more useful. And then shortly after that, we realized that the VC version was actually faster again. So again, early Eyeball Frog, the N64 only glitch, it saved a lot of time, but just the way that other discoveries were going at the time, it seemed to be not as useful, and VC was starting to catch up just because VC has, less lag and faster loading. And so VC was catching up again. And VC had a very unique route, a significantly different route than the N64 route. And Equip Swap also had some more uses for that and some more route change uses for that. So Equip Swap, like over time, even though it wasn't initially thought of as something super big, the way it changed the route over time became really significant. And at this point, I think Equip Swap has probably saved close to 20 minutes.
Wow.
Since it was first found. And
from zero to hero, Equip Swap.
Yeah.
The Cinderella story of glitches.
Yeah, there's always that honeymoon period where at first it's like, wow, we found something new, and then the very next day it's like, but what does it really matter?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because we just didn't think it was that big, and then we thought it was super big, and then we didn't think it was, and it turned out to be big after a long period of time, after a lot more experimentation and more brainstorming and figuring out how we can really use it. Because I think we, when it was first found, we didn't quite realize the total potential of it until just more time passed and we had more time to experiment with it, right. Which I think is actually one of my favorite. I love those glitches the most. Most glitches where its uses aren't exactly obvious initially, where you learn more about it, and as you learn more about it, you realize it has a lot more uses than you initially thought.
That makes sense.
That's awesome.
So, just a few things that I wanted to touch on before we hit the one big one at the end. So, I really like the ground jump glitch. Can you explain the ground jump glitch to me?
Yeah, so it's actually really weird. So you try to grab a bomb while shielding and targeting. So Link is trying to pick up the bomb, but he can't because he's shielding, and that's just preventing the next action from happening. So then the bomb explodes, and then all your buttons are disabled. Your B and C buttons are disabled. And if you try to do a backflip or a side hop, Link starts the backflip or side hop, but then it immediately gets canceled. But you still get that upwards momentum from it, and so it results in just a jump.
That's cool.
Oh.
Yeah, you can use that in a few spots to... I mean, Link's not supposed to be able to jump. That's not in his repertoire, but you can use that to grab really fairly low ledges. And I see that a lot from randomizer players and runners, and I've always kind of been curious myself how that works. So I threw that in.
Yeah, it sounds like cheating to me.
It's definitely one of the easiest glitches to learn, so I'm sure randomizer players are probably... The ones that like just jumping into the small things in OOT, probably learning that one of the first things they learn.
Right. So you wanted to mention a few kind of cool out of bounds things before we jump into get item manipulation. So what'd you have for us for out of bounds?
Yeah, so out of bounds in this game is really interesting. So anytime you're in an area with multiple different rooms, all of the collision in any room, but only one room has any textures or objects in it. And so especially in dungeons, this becomes really useful because you can get out of bounds and just go to other rooms that you're not supposed to early, or the big one is getting to boss rooms early. Okay. So the same applies to boss loading zones. So boss loading zones, no matter where you are in the dungeon, the boss loading zone will be there. And so if you can get out of bounds and you can find the boss loading zone, you can get there early, skip the boss key, skip any puzzles that would otherwise be required to get there, and that's really big. Not only that, but just being able to move out of bounds, thanks to other collision, can let you get certain items from out of bounds. Like there are certain like gold skulltulas that are blocked by some obstacle, and you can get out of bounds and get them from the other direction, or just go past certain walls. Like there are certain things that you can hookshot on the other side of this wall, but it's blocked by a gate, so you can go out of bounds and just skip that obstacle and hook shot behind it.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so finally, I guess the big one, which I think had the biggest impact, at least it seems, on any percent, is get item manipulation. So can you tell us a little bit about what get item manipulation is?
Yeah, so in this game, when you're diving and you get an item from a dive, it's only used a few times in the game, but you don't actually get the item until you rise up to the surface. This is used most notably with Rudo's letter in Lake Hylia. So you dive to go down, get it, you rise from the surface, and then you pick it up. And so what this glitch does is you can get an item and not actually do that resurfacing thing. And it can also be done with a crawl space without water at all.
Okay.
Where you exit from a crawl space, grab an item, and then an enemy hits you. And so you don't actually pick this item up, but the game still has it stored that you're supposed to be getting an item soon.
Okay.
And so when you're in this state, if you go in front of a chest, the chest can change what items you're supposed to get just by walking in front of a chest. You don't have to open it, you just walk in front of it. And it'll change the item value of whatever you're supposed to be getting. Then you can actually trigger the supposed to get item event just by going in the water, and then you get some other item. So in the case of any percent, the big use for it is in the Decatry, you can go in front of the map chest and then go in the water, and that'll give you a bottle with blue potion. So a bottle is really important because you need it for wrong warping. And what you used to do is you used to escape the forest and go to Kakariko to get the bottle, but now you could get the bottle in the Deku Tree. And the one downside of it is you have to empty the blue potion, go to Lost Woods to get some bugs, and then you can actually use bugs for the wrong warp, but it's still overall faster than going all the way to Kakariko for it.
Right.
And there's also some other uses, like you can use GIM to get light arrows, which you can also just get in the Deku Tree. You can go in front of a chest with a recovery heart in it, and you get light arrows, which is pretty huge.
There's never been a time where a recovery heart chest has been so useful.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's
And,
a pretty big one.
Yeah, you can get some other items like Goron Tunic is used in Max Percent Child. That's the only way to get the Goron Tunic in that category. There's a way to get fire arrows with the most complex, difficult trick in the game that involves hovering off a flying enemy like 1,000 times in a row. Which I don't think any human will ever do, but if you can do that, you can get fire arrows as child.
You need a category that's all GIM. Like, you're only allowed to collect items if you get them through GIM.
Yeah, that wouldn't be very fun.
Yeah, that would be really frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that played a big role in the change in any percent, right? I think the world record before that was Narcissa with a 1820. What was it?
It was 1810. It was actually beaten by a few seconds by Jodenstone. It was like 1807, I think.
That's right.
Right before GIM was found.
Right. And now it's all the way down to a 1707 by Skater, so that's pretty big.
Saved a good minute.
Is there anything else that you'd like to mention about Ocarina of Time speedrunning before we go into some really quick Q&A? Maybe if anyone's interested in learning Ocarina of Time, what might they do to get started?
Yeah, I think we covered all the big points. You want me to go over like where to learn right now, or
yeah, I mean,
like, is there a tutorial or website people can go to kind of see
So Zelda speedrun or zelda.speedruns.com is probably a good place to start. It's a bit outdated with some stuff, but it's got a lot of basic stuff. And the Ocarina of Time Discord is a really good place to learn. There's just plenty of people that'll help you learn. Plus, there's a resources channel with a lot of good resources to get started. You can find that Discord on zelda.speedruns.com. There's actually a Discords tab. You can find any games speedrunning community Discord, including the Ocarina of Time one.
Very nice.
And yeah, there's a lot of people there that'll always be there to help ask questions and get you the help you need.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So we'll go ahead and take a quick break, actually, listen to some music, give you all in chat a chance to ask any questions if you have any additional ones you've been holding on to, and we will answer your live Q&A. So before we dive into our live Q&A, I just want to thank all of you for hanging out here at twitch.tv/theframesavers. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, maybe you just came here because it's Ocarina of Time or because you love ZFG, feel free to check us out at theframesavers.com. It has links to everything, our iTunes, Google, anywhere you can find the podcast. It also has links to our Twitch channel and Twitter where you can follow us, get updates, and to our Discord where you can hang out, ask Q&A, hang out with us, and just chat about future episodes. If you do want to support us, you can subscribe on our Twitch channel and get some cool emotes, or you can go to patreon.com/theframesavers. We recently just completed voting for a listener selected episode, so we do those every few months, and we rely on our patrons to do that. It allows us to pay for editing, hosting, buying new mics, stuff like that. So thank you all for your support. We're going to go ahead and dive into the first Q&A question, which is from Mari Link, and this is directed to ZFG. So ZFG, if you were hired to teach a semester-long college course on Ocarina of Time speedrunning, how would you structure it? I want a full syllabus. Let's go. Please don't go.
That's really interesting. I'd probably start with some of the basics like ISG and ground jump and super sliding, and door time skip also. Door time skip's like the big glitch that's probably the most important to learn really early on, just because it opens up the game really so much. I guess like wrong warping could probably come after that. Some basic wrong warp stuff, some basic any percent and no I am wrong warp stuff. Second semester we get into hundo.
So I was gonna say there's gonna be more than one semester to this class, I feel.
Oh
like.
Yeah.
Yeah, this episode alone
these are
covered
501 courses. These are graduate level.
Yeah, this episode covered almost nothing, and it's 2 hours now. So I mean,
yeah.
If you the rabbit hole goes deep, my friends. If you are a big fan of ZFG and you just know 100%, it seems that there is more to this story. I can't imagine one semester being sufficient to tell the whole story of Ocarina of Time speedrunning.
Yeah. Luckily, we charge a lot less than college tuition, so that's good.
That's true.
Right. So Zelnus asks, if you could remove one discovery or glitch from the game from history, what would it be, and why do you think it would improve the game?
Honestly, I don't really know if there's really something I don't like that was discovered. I don't want to like cop out, so I'm like trying to think of something. But
is there like a trick that you find extremely frustrating to perform, and you feel like it kills runs? I mean, even if it's saving a lot of time, maybe if it just had never been found, then your runs would be more consistent, or your runs would feel more optimized, or something.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of something, but
ZFG loves glitches. I don't think he.
Yeah, man, they're all so good. I guess if there's one thing, the po-duping. I'm a little bit disappointed that po-duping was found because I actually did like collecting all the pos. It's a very unique opinion. Other people do not really like collecting those pos, but I do, and I think po-duping was kind of nice.
Big fan of the pos. So
okay,
next question.
So not duping them would have improved the game. That's
by having more pos.
Exactly.
You like it.
Yeah.
Bruceinator asks you, how can a runner stand the constant noises Link makes when he's doing back jumps and side jumps? Doesn't it drive you mad?
You just tune him out. Honestly, like even when I was a kid or like just starting out speedrunning, I never really got bothered. So I don't know. Even the low health beeping, I was never really bothered by. Maybe I just have a high tolerance for annoying stuff, but I don't know.
Come on the podcast.
Exactly.
You're dealing with us, so you must have a real high tolerance.
We've actually talked about that before. We have a tendency to talk a lot about bad games, and it seems like bad games and bad music go hand in hand, and the answer is always like, I mean, you sit there and play it for long enough, and it just you don't hear it anymore. It's right in your ears, but you don't hear it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Liz asks from Discord, what's your favorite glitch? It doesn't even have to be useful. It could be something that no one ever sees in a speedrun.
I guess I have like two kind of answers to this. One, just overall favorite glitch is probably ass chest. The glitch where you open an invisible chest behind a Gerudo in Gerudo, and out comes a spooky mask. It was actually a glitch I found in 2009. Did not become useful in a speedrun until 2018. It really cool that it finally, like, it was just like this kind of glitch exhibition glitch. Like it was shown in GDQ glitch exhibitions just as a funny glitch, and eventually got into a speedrun finally.
Nice.
But my other answer would just be Hess, just because it just feels like a really satisfying movement technique to move so fast, and once you practice it so much, just be able to control your speed so well.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, you answered one of the other questions because someone was already asking about ass chests. So
Yeah, how does it work?
knocked out.
I mean, that was the question: was how does it work? Like, how do you trigger that to happen?
I don't know. There's, it's super complicated. Well, I guess I can talk about how you trigger it. You get a glitched quiver, so it involves reverse bottle adventure, where you use RBA to get a glitched quiver that only holds 20 arrows, which is lower than 30, the normal minimum. And so you try to win the quiver upgrade. And so when you win the quiver upgrade, it says, okay, do you need to get the 40 arrow quiver or the 50? So it looks and it sees 20. It sees what are you supposed to do with 20? You're supposed to have 30 or 40. And so it's just like it does something else, and that something else is for some reason opening a chest. I know that there is like a sort of explanation. MCX Rules has a video on it. I think it's called Ass Chest Manipulation, because you can actually manipulate what item you get from it with doing some other more complicated stuff.
Okay.
And he explains it in his video, and I don't understand it, but it's there.
If you can't understand it, we have no hope of talking about it on this podcast, because it'll be way outside the scope of our understanding. In Twitch chat, Sponsy asks, how does high jump to fire arrows work? So everyone has really loved your explanation of every glitch in this game, and suddenly they realize, now I want to know how my thing works.
Yeah, so it's a really cool glitch where in like Hylia, there's this gold Skulltula on top of a tree, and so I try to get this Skulltula, but then right before I get it, I press the Ocarina button, and this delays getting the Skulltula until you hit the ground. But by the time you already hit the ground, the Skulltula is so far off screen that it's unloaded, so it doesn't give it to you yet. But as soon as the camera goes within range of the Skulltula again, it'll instantly give it to you. So what you do is you take out the hookshot and you try to hookshot this tree, and you hookshot the tree right as the camera is moving within range of the Skulltula. So then you hookshot the tree, the hookshot gets interrupted by the Skulltula text. Then when you close the text, you get a huge jump. And it's because when you hookshot the tree, you get like a very short burst of upward speed, just because that's how the hookshot works. But then it doesn't cancel it because of the hookshot text like interrupting the hookshot. And so you get this huge burst of upward speed, and it just goes on and gives you a huge jump.
I suddenly remember seeing this glitch. This is the Fortnite glitch. This is the where we drop the voice.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of Fortnite.
No. Banned topic. So Kestrel OTP asks if you can talk a little bit about the Ocarina of Time 3D speedrunning community. He says, I know you don't play it, but you must have seen it grow. So is there like a relationship between the Ocarina of Time 3D community and the Ocarina of Time community?
Yeah, so I don't know if there's too much overlap. There's a little bit of overlap. But OT3D is a really interesting game because there's a lot of stuff that was patched from original OT, but there's also a lot of stuff that wasn't, and there's also a lot of just new glitches exclusive to OT3D. So it's still very broken, but also in very different ways. Like, for example, wrong warping is pretty much more powerful because you can do it anywhere where there's a grotto. And it's like a different type of wrong warping, but it's super powerful. You can do hookshot jumps, like the hookshot jump I just mentioned with the Skulltula. It's a very situational thing. In OT3D, you can do it pretty much anywhere because of the new boot mechanics. Like the fact that the boots become an item on a button actually just makes the trick possible anywhere really easily, which is really cool. So yeah, OT3D, it's really cool. The one downside of it is that there's no glitch to get early explosives, which means that the beginning of pretty much any speedrun is, or at least for a while, it was get up to the bombs almost glitchless, except for skipping the Deku Tree. And then once you get bombs, you finally start doing glitches. I say until recently because there's actually a glitch found recently where you can get Furor's Wind without bombs. And so like the OT3D community for a long time was, wishing, if we could have this one wish, please give us early explosives. We don't care how it happens, just early explosives, please. And so they found a way to skip explosives entirely, at least for any percent, by getting Furor's Wind early.
That's amazing.
Wow. So it's just a very different experience all around. That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I was actually
it's
gonna
still
ask earlier whether or not it was like based on the same code base, like whether or not the previous glitches from Ocarina of Time made their way into 3D.
Yeah, yeah, it is the same code base. In fact, in an earlier version of the game, in a demo version that was playable at stores, were actually able to get the infinite sword glitch, and so, uh, unfortunately, someone uploaded the video of that to YouTube, and the theory goes that that's the reason it doesn't exist in the final version.
Right.
Although there actually is an alternate version of infinite sword glitch that still does work. It's just really stupid to get, and like one of the hardest tricks, but yeah, it is the same base code. It is still so that's why there's still a lot of glitches that do still exist, but still a lot that don't. Actually, funny story about that is there's a theory that most of the glitches that were patched in OT 3D were all glitches from an old any% speed run by Pokey in I think 1 hour 16 minutes. We're like 90% sure that
Like they specifically
the dev
watched
team,
that video,
they
and every
watched
glitch they saw, they banned that one.
yeah, they watched that speed run. They're like, okay, let's fix all these glitches. And the one really funny thing about this is in that run, there's a way to get to the bottom of the well very early, like 10 minutes into the run. And so they wanted to fix that glitch. So what they did is they put a boulder in front of bottom of the well, and so you can't get in there and that boulder gets removed when play Song of Storms to drain the well. But the catch is it's only there during the daytime,
Oh
and they
wow.
didn't put it there at night.
So now that changes your strat for that whole situation.
Yeah, so all you have to do to get to bottom of the well early in OT3D, do it at night instead of during the day.
That's funny.
And it's not there.
I mean, I'm sure also we didn't talk about that version too much in depth, but I know they added some quality of life changes, including, like you said, being able
Boots
to switch
becoming
boots
items,
buttons.
Yeah,
Like
the boots thing is really nice.
I'm
More
sure
buttons.
that provides a lot of different, issues, that glitches and exploits that could go forward. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to just read one last question, because if I were ever to run Ocarina of Time, I'm sure I would run this category, is that people want to know when you're going to get world record for all cows. I don't know what that is, but I think I want that world record.
I am never running all cows again.
Okay.
I will never have the record in that category again. Sorry.
Do you just talk to all the cows?
You have to milk them all.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. I feel silly for even asking.
What an idiot. So that is all of our live Q&A. We really appreciate a lot of you all hanging out here, especially a bunch of new faces because of our boy ZFG, who did a great job. Thank you so much, ZFG. Where can they find you if they don't already follow you or watch your stuff?
My Twitch is ZFG1. My Twitter is ZFG111. I think that's pretty much it.
Okay. You have a YouTube?
Oh yeah, YouTube is, I think, just ZFG.
Nice. Well, go give ZFG a follow. He's one of the stalwarts of the Ocarina of Time speedrunning world and is just a great watch. Did an awesome job. So thank you so much for that. Where can they find you, Chad?
You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube as Author Blues. Where can they find you?
You can find me at John Carls on Twitter and Twitch, and John Carls1 on YouTube. As always, like I said, if you want to follow us on anything else, go to theframesavers.com. We want to give a shout out real quick to our $25 a month patrons: Tina Hacks, Mr. Pizak, Kip with 2 P's, and DDRREEXX, Drex. They give us $25 a month. Go give them follows. Also, again, a shout out to the Electric Underground podcast for sponsoring us. Go check them out. It's a podcast about shmups. And also our friends at Warp World. Check them out at podcast.warp.world. They do a lot of modern gaming news and Twitch culture news. Also, give us follows everywhere. Check us out. Feel free to come back. We do a lot of obscure games as well as big famous games. You can go back. We have a backlog of over 100 episodes if you liked what you saw here. Huge shout out to Brian Morgenthaler for producing this podcast. You can find him at BMorgs TV on Twitter and Twitch. And any last thoughts about the Ocarina of Times?
This is yeah, go.
I was just gonna say I think we covered everything pretty well, or as well as possible in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, for sure. This and Super Mario 64 are the two games I've been watching for the longest, which makes me the most average speedrun watcher in the world, because that's the two games that everyone watches. But I'm really glad that we finally got to do this episode, and getting to do it with ZFG. Really, I mean, I don't think we could have done this episode any better than this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for ZFG coming on. I'm glad we did this. It forced me to actually play through this whole game, which probably never would have happened. So thank you if you hung out with me and endured my frustrations there. And definitely come check us out. Our pocket's going to be a little late this week, so just keep that in mind because we got GDQ submissions. But that's only for our live audience here. And yeah, thanks and come back again.
See ya.
All right, thanks for having me.